Are there? Welcome. I declare the meeting of the City of Port Phillip Council open, and I welcome members of the public that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There's a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time, and during public question time, members of the public may ask a specific question on general matters other than those that are relating to a topic that's on the agenda for tonight. Members of the public are only to ask specific questions and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official meeting minutes will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question and or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda, and this will be done prior to the Council considering the item. And we encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor, are not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, but rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect of the Council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the directions of the Chair. So if you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to try and limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that all council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision making and debate and improving our openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view on Council's website in about 48 hours. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question or makes a comment about an agenda item, they'll not be filmed, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. And please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be audio or videotaped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. Okay, so now we'll start with the agenda. Item number 1, apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies?
Madam Mayor, there's an apology from Councillor Dick Ross.
Councillor Simic, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move to the items number 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on June the 7th, 2017 have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to the minutes? No, there are none. I'll now, do I have a motion to confirm that? Councillor Bond to move, Councillor Simic to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3, which is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? Councillor Pearl?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I, Councillor Marcus Pearl, declare that in relation to item 8.8, Annual Insurance Renewal 2017-2018, that I have a conflict of interest in this matter by way of an indirect financial interest.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. I'll ask you to step out at that item. Item 4, petitions and joint letters. So, councillors, we've got 2 petitions tonight. First of all, I'll go to petition 1, which is traffic calming measures in Tennyson Street, Elwood. And, councillors, we don't have anyone that's requested to speak to this item. Do you have any questions of the officers on this item? I note there are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Bond to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Would you like to speak to your motion? Would anyone like to speak to this motion? Then I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move to petition 2, which is the St Kilda Sea Baths roof terrace. And councillors, we've received one person. One person has requested to speak to this item. So I'll call on Mr Alan West. Mr West, if you would come forward, pop the microphone on and state your name and suburb for the record, please.
Alan West from St Kilda West. The Mayor, Councillors and CEO, this petition commenced on April the 2nd and has been running for 11 weeks. The background contained on the petition is missing on the agenda notes, so I wish to first read the background that was included on the petition and then make a comment. Quote, background. The Sea Baths in St Kilda is on Crown public land. As part of the renovations, around the year 2000, in negotiations with Council, the applicant agreed to the designation of the rooftop terrace as a public space. Now the operators have an application before Council, 829/2016, to be gifted over half the public space in conjunction with a liquor licence for 300 people, with no reciprocal benefit to the public that outweighs the loss of the space. If the Council giving away this public space is not acceptable, please sign the petition. And then you've got the words of the petition there. So I'd like to speak to that now, if I may. With increasing intensive urbanisation and the dollar shaping Melbourne, it is fortunate that councillors who have gone before you have understood the importance and seen fit to leave a legacy of public spaces on Crown land. With this foresight, this has been their gift to us, and we honour them for doing so. Precious spaces like the observation deck on the Sea Baths rooftop is just one example within the city of Port Phillip. It is there for all, rich and poor, to be able to enjoy a fantastic view of St Kilda foreshore and environs, all free to the public for common use and unfettered access. A place where families and friends can enjoy a view, where young and old can gather, giving them a chance to enjoy this special place where alcohol is not sold, giving them another reason to love St Kilda. This petition asks for all the public space at the Sea Baths to be retained as such. It has been said that the Sea Baths operators were proposing a deal for Council to agree to give up some of the public space to magically secure the rest in a ratifying document. Yet the rooftop is already public space, as mentioned in the approved permit 876/2010. Not many parents would want to take their children up to an area that is shared with the sale of alcohol. If Council comes to some shared compromise, you'll be effectively taking all the area rooftop away from them and anyone else of a similar nature. And with respect to the Council forming a position regarding this application going to VCAT, we hope our legal representatives are strongly briefed to not compromise our public space, to maintain it in its entirety with no commencement of selling alcohol up there and not gifting any part of the public space to the Sea Baths or any other private operator. That is why over 900 people have, to this date, have signed this petition. I now present this petition to the Mayor, the councillors, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr West. I will note that that application has not come before us at this time. So, councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are no more members of the public to speak. Thank you, Councillor Pearl.
Through you, Madam Mayor, would the officers be able to provide an update on the status of that application?
Ms Ferris-Miles.
Through you, Madam Mayor. At this point in time, officers are considering the application and they have not yet formed a view, and also there's been no decision of council on the application. The applicant has lodged the application to be determined by VCAT.
Councillor Pearl, follow-up.
Under what situation has it gone to VCAT as opposed to coming to this council for decision? So what's the reasons behind why it's now gone to a VCAT hearing essentially before this council would make a decision on it?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The reason it's gone to VCAT is because the applicant has raised a failure to make a decision within the prescribed time.
Sorry, why did it, under what circumstances didn't it come to council for a decision?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the matter hasn't come to council for a decision. It was lodged with our planning department, and we were advised that the application was on hold by the applicant, and then subsequently we were advised that the applicant had lodged with VCAT for a failure appeal.
Councillor Simic.
Just briefly, if you could elaborate on the timeline that we're working towards. When will VCAT be hearing this matter? Do we know at this point? And is it likely to come to council at some point after VCAT's considered it?
Mr. Borg.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the hearing date is a practice day is listed for the 7th of July. The practice day will be for all parties to explain the process that they will take in the hearing. There is a compulsory conference listed for the 9th of August, and there's a full hearing listed for the 25th of September. Now, the practice day is the most important one because there is a discussion. There will be a discussion in relation to the coastal management consent that's already been approved, so that's a matter that we will test at that practice day, and that will give us some direction as to the next steps that we'll take.
Mr. Borg, I'll ask a question as well, just to clarify. Normally, if the officers determine it should be refused, that doesn't come to council. In this case, has a councillor called it in, even if it has been refused?
In response, Madam Mayor, a councillor hasn't officially called it in. Yes, through delegation, refusals can be done by officers. That is a discussion I think we will need to have after the practice day hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Borg. Councillor Brand.
I just want to clarify that if the officers were of a mind for some form of approval, then what would be the practice and the timeline on that for involving the council itself?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the process would be that if the officers were of a mind to support the application, the matter would be brought to a council meeting. I believe it would be looking at the council meeting of August the 2nd. If we brought that up, that would be the times we'd be able to get up, so that will be prior to the compulsory conference, so we will take a position to the compulsory conference.
Ms Ferris-Miles.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, just to add to what Mr. Borg said, it's important to note that the officer recommendation tonight is to note the receipt of the petition, which Mr. West has spoken to, and so officers will be preparing a response to that petition at a forthcoming council meeting.
Councillor Bond.
One of the reasons for council's failure to determine within the 60 days was that we wrote back to the Department of Land, Water, Environment, Planning, asking for a revised coastal consent notice because the plans applied for didn't match the previous coastal consent notice. Have we had a response from DeWalt to a revised response from the DeWalt for the coastal consent notice that matches the plans that were applied for?
Through you, Madam Mayor. No, just a point of clarification there, Councillor Bond. We weren't going to be lodging that request. It is for the applicant to lodge that request. So the applicant, as we understand, as I've been informed at about 3:30 this afternoon, they haven't lodged a request as yet. They're not of the view that they need to, which is that we take a very different view in relation to that. So that's one of the matters that will be contested at the practice day.
Any further questions, councillors, on the petition 2? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just to thank the members of the community that have shown an interest in this matter. We really appreciate it when our community gets involved and expresses their view, and we appreciate the effort and time that it takes to put together a compliant petition. So we'll be receiving it and taking the views of the community on board.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Pearl?
Only the second what Councillor Copsey just said.
Any other councillor like to speak? Note that Councillor Brand.
Well, basically to third it, but I just do want to reassure any I suppose taciturness on the part of council at the moment is because we're in the middle of this process. We're listening to the community. We're not in a position at the moment to actually start debating in public what our next likely moves are, but we are certainly listening.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Anybody else? No? Then I will put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to item 5, which is the sealing schedule, and there are no documents requiring sealing tonight. So then we'll move to item 6, which is public question time. And councillors, we have 2 members of the public that have requested to speak. I'd like to call on Mr. Milo Matthews, please. Councillors, I requested Milo to come in and speak to you tonight, and he's got his whole family here. Milo was at the Creatures of the Bay, and he's from St Kilda Primary School, and they contributed to the Creatures of the Bay exhibition, so he's got a few words to say to us.
Hi, my name is Milo. I'm going to tell you why you should not use plastic. You need to stop hurting the environment, but unfortunately there are a lot of people who don't put rubbish in the bin because they don't think deeply about it. Did you know when it rains all the plastic goes into the drains and comes out in the ocean? Did you know that plastic can kill and hurt a lot of things, like trees, plants, sea animals, and many other things? The ocean is looking terrible, and we need to fix that. This is what we did to help the environment. We went to Elwood Beach with Beach Patrol and picked up a lot of rubbish. With this rubbish, we made sea creatures. I hope that all our hard work has paid off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milo. I'm sure the councillors enjoyed your little presentation, and if anyone wants to see the Creatures by the Bay artwork by the children, in particular, it's at Gasworks Arts Park. Would you like to say something, Councillor Crawford?
Well, yeah, I would, because Milo, myself, Tim, and Councillor Baxter and Councillor Gross were down there that day that you came down doing Beach Patrol. We were down there, and it was really great to see so many kids, and I think they collected so many bags of rubbish. So I thank you very much for your hard work, and I haven't been to see the Creatures yet, but I'm looking forward to doing it because we're really concerned about plastic too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'll call on the next person for public question time. Teresa Warren, please.
Thank you for this time. Teresa Warren, 200 Dock Street, South Melbourne. Will be half comment too. So my question is it possible that a better working relationship can be developed between Council and DHHS, especially the Clarendon Street Housing Office, so that the pits in St Luke's streets are cleaned when they should be, and that no more clothing bins are installed at the end of St Luke's Street. And a lot of you are aware that I worked very hard last year in making sure those pits did get cleaned. At one stage we had 14 clothing bins in that area, including some along the footpath in St Luke's Street. And there seems to be who has responsibility of St Luke's Street. Last year I went to the trouble of finding out when St Luke's Street officially got made into the car park for the high-rise residents in the flats. The mayor was going to, much to my dishonour, Sunday afternoon I was coming back for something. What do I see? 4 clothing bins in St Luke's Street. Spoke to the mayor and spoke to a couple of councillors Monday night, and much to my delight, the clothing bins were removed by yesterday afternoon. So thank you for that. But I feel as if there is a need for some sort of better working relationship so that these problems don't occur again. Some of you, I could talk easily for about 15 minutes, the type of things that was left around those bins, including one corner next to Coles loading bay, normal household rubbish. So I hope something can be done so things are done when they should, and thank you for this time.
Thank you, Teresa. So we will take on notice the question about the pits and the better relationship with DHHS, and I guess the bins have gone, but I'd like to know how do they get there? Who gives authority?
So last year at AGM,
thank you, Teresa.
They bring up one, they get told no, it's not our responsibility, and the other, and things happen.
Righto. Thanks very much. Councillors, that's the end of our public question time. Councillor question time. Item 7, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Just got 2 questions tonight in response to some community questions I've been getting. The first one's in relation to the advertisement for the sale of land for the Pride Centre, which I think holds wholehearted support from councillors sitting here, but I think it was a fair and reasonable question given the amount of decision making that was made in confidential realm. The question is, with reference to the recent public notice of the intention for council to sell land for the Pride Centre for the price of $1, can officers please provide the background to council's decision to sell the land for $1 to a limited liability company rather than lease the land over the 20-year period as detailed in the advertisement, to ensure that the land stays in public hands. As a follow-up also, can you also provide what would happen to that land after the 20-year period that's detailed in the notice?
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Ms McNeil.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The decision to put in a bid that included the sale of land was a decision that was based on a response to the invitation for expression of interest. So the invitation was set out the requirements that they were looking for the establishment of the Pride Centre, and that included a very strong preference for freehold land. And so the decision was made in order to make a competitive bid to include freehold land. And that was supported by a strategic business case that was developed that indicated that there was in the realm of, for the return on investment of about the value of $13 million by council. There would be, the value over 20-year period was around $46 million. And so as an activator for the area, that's quite significant return. So leveraging the $15 million that state government was putting in, that justified the offer that was put in, which included this sale. And so after the 20 years, to answer the second question, is that the Victorian Pride Board has the opportunity to then revise how they use that. But we were able to put that proviso in that for 20 years they needed to use the land for a Pride Centre specifically, and over a 20-year period we expect to get the benefits, so to realise the benefits from the investment. So after that time we'll have already secured the benefits for the investment, and after that time they then need to notify us if they are intending to change the use, which then gives us an opportunity to engage in a conversation, but that really it is freehold for them after that.
Thank you, Ms McNeil. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Simic?
Sorry, I'm taking Councillor Gross's position tonight. No, I'm looking to ask a question about the state government's announcement regarding the alternative to pill testing, which was announced over the weekend, announcing stop and search powers, which there's no empirical evidence around, and not endorsing the position which Council has been arguing for around pill testing, which there's quite a lot of evidence supporting a trial. So my question is whether the City of Port Phillip was consulted prior to the state government's floating plans for expanding police powers, including the ability to stop and search people without reason.
Ms Shenikow?
Through you, Madam Mayor. We have not been asked to respond specifically to police powers. However, on the 8th of March, Council endorsed our submission to the state government on drug law reform, in which we made recommendations related to drug harm minimisation.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl?
This one comes from a couple of business owners all in the St Kilda Road district. Can officers please detail when parking meters on Hannah Street and around the business areas of St Kilda Road will be installed with credit card / Apple Pay facilities?
Ms Blair, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there will be upgrades to a number of the parking machines in Hannah Street and St Kilda Road as part of the upgrade we're doing this year by October this year.
Any further questions, councillors? I had one that I have been asked this numerous times, so I thought I'd ask it in this forum. So what evidence do we have that opening the road at the corner of Farrars and City Road to two-way traffic will not increase the rat running to avoid the Montague lights, the corner there? It was actually originally put in there to stop that. So I'm concerned that drivers will come from Montague Street and through any one of those side streets to exit at City Road to avoid the Montague intersection. Mr Trail?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Vic Roads are currently delivering a traffic control on the intersection of City Road and Farrar Street. That's been installed for two reasons. One, to help construction activity with the building of the Farrar Street School and community facilities, and Montague Park in the coming 12 months. The likelihood of rat running is possible with the adoption of the scope for the streetscape in Montague Park that Council has endorsed. We've got some measures in place to try and alleviate rat running. They are narrowing the roads, they are multiple drop-off zones, they are reducing the speed limits and committing to having good temporary facilities for when the school opens with zebra crossings. We will be monitoring and working with Vic Roads around the issue of rat running. The two-way entry is required because we are expecting a lot more vehicle traffic when the school opens, when the netball court and other community facilities are being activated. So we need to ensure that people can safely get in and out of that Montague precinct. If rat running is on the increase, there's signal control adjustments that can be made and further localised measures in place. But we are working with Vic Roads as we design the streetscape design.
Thank you, Mr Trail. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor, question time? No? Then we'll move to item 8, which is a presentation of reports. Councillors, I intend to hear the reports in a different order than they're laid out. I'm going to hear 8.4 first, given that it may have a budget impact, before I hear item 1, which is council plans. So we'll go to item 8.4 first. We've had no requests from the members of the public to speak on this item. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers? I have a question. We'll start off with. There they are. They're a bit slow to the table. I wanted to ask a question specifically around the last trial that was held at Waterfront Place, Station Pier. And I wanted to understand what the learnings were from that trial for the fee reduction, please. And also how that's translated into this recommendation.
Through you, make sure I get that right. Through you, Madam Mayor. So the council undertook a winter fee reduction parking trial between the 1st of July to the 31st of October in 2012 for all foreshore off and on-street car parks, not including the St Kilda Triangle site, which translated to a halving of the usual fee from $2.20, down to $2.20 an hour or $5 a day. The results from that, and I suppose some of the learnings there, are that there was a substantial loss in terms of parking income in the respect of $145,000. And even with a halving of the parking fee, there was a reduction overall in the total number of transactions by 6% with lower parking fees. The only exception to that was in a portion of Elwood, which actually saw an increase in the number of transactions. What it highlighted to us, and a lesson learned, is that in some degree the price in this area is not necessarily a strong, tangible relationship between the patronage at these foreshore car parks. In terms of how that's been applied in terms of the recommendation, it's been reviewing the transactional data in respect to Waterfront Place as a trial site to understand the seasonality of parking demands across the year. And parking transaction data, when we looked at that across a time series, you can see there's a significant variation in the winter periods versus the summer periods. And from this perspective, sought to understand and trial that in terms of understanding the changes between parking demand and price through the winter period, testing that relationship, and as a way of really piloting it in a sense to understand that and to use that as another way of a tangible lesson to inform our overall paid parking approach as proposed through the draft council plan and the parking management plan and integrated transport strategy.
Councillor Bond.
In that 2012 trial, what was the absolute numbers that the revenue dropped from versus the previous year, and what was the absolute number change in transactions versus the previous year?
In a specific location or everywhere?
For the entire period that was covered by the trial.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have that data to hand necessarily and can take that on notice. It would require a little bit of data crunching. I do have it in a graph, but would have to aggregate that.
Another question. With the MRC Cagney report that most of this analysis is based upon, was there any consideration of the state-imposed congestion levy given?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The scope of the MR Cagney work in respect to paid parking policy recommendations and Fisherman's Bend investigations for paid parking do not explicitly include the considerations of the congestion levy, as the report was primarily focused on on-street parking in respect to paid parking. It's worth noting that at present, Council's off-street car parking is located in some of the congestion levy areas, levied at $980 per year per car space, and that equates to roughly a liability for Council on 841 paid parking spaces of $807,000. As I mentioned, in terms of it's not necessarily explicitly covered in respect to the report, although the impacts of the congestion levy in respect to parking pricing and the viability of that are taken into consideration as other factors in terms of the pricing of off-street car parks relative to on-street.
Another question from me. On page 69 of their report, it says there's currently a limited market for commercial parking due to council underpricing. Just wanted to understand what you make of that. I wouldn't have necessarily agree with that, but just how do they determine that our prices are underpriced?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not aware of the exact wording as page 69 of the MR Keating report. I do have a table in front of me. However, on that basis, though, of that comment, what I can take from it is that there is still a level of uncontrolled or unrestricted on-street car parking within the City of Port Phillip, potentially within walkable distances from shopping strips and other locations, which enable people the flexibility to park further away and not pay a fee. And for that perspective, the market response is awaiting, I suppose, opportunities where the conversion or use of land for commercial off-street car parks becomes in a more financially viable model.
Another question. Do we understand who parks in these car parks? Say the difference. Is there a different sort of person? Is it tourist, resident, parks in, say, waterfront place as opposed to Fitzroy Street or others? Do we actually understand who these people are?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's difficult for us to determine what type of people, they say, or the purpose of their travel based on parking data. It is a data gap per se, but it would require extensive intercept surveying to understand and appreciate from a parking space point of view the purpose of their journey and where they're coming from and what the purpose of their journey is. We do, however, note through that regular reporting through the Vibrant Villages program have undertaken in the past intercept surveys to understand how people have travelled to centres in a product location, but not necessarily in respect to this report.
I note that one of the key points that I certainly agree with is that, you know, the parking pricing and timing is used to turn over car parking so that there's, you know, that there's places for people to park should they want to, and we also actively discourage commuter parking. So by having the very act of having a daily price, wouldn't that automatically assume that we're okay with commuter parking?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's an interesting question and something that I suppose through the MR Keating report they've put forth a recommendation in terms of reassessing the application of all-day or maximum rate car parking. It's something that needs to be considered further and understood a bit more in terms of a financial sense. But in terms of the premise of deterring long stay or commuter car parking, that is consistent with our existing policy settings.
So I'll ask another question. There's no other councillors got their hands up, so I'll go one more. So what would you What would you say if we removed that option, or is that a problem if we remove the option for all-day parking and just people paid per hour?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of looking, and what MR Cagney did was looking more broadly in terms of internationally as well as other similar municipalities or local areas within Victoria primarily, but also further afield. The purest view in terms of the use of paid parking is the use of the market, in terms of not having time controls or a maximum rate, but using the charge itself as a way of people changing and metering their own behaviour about how long they use that car park for, and therefore how much they pay.
Councillor Simic.
Just with respect to commuter parking, having commuter parking option available, does that encourage people to leave their car perhaps and engage in other modes of transport, which we would also be encouraging, like public transport or walking?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are a number of benefits that paid parking can provide. One of them, I think, as you touched on already, is in respect to providing or incentivising a suitable level of parking availability through turnover. One of the other ones is in terms of, because there is a price attached to the use of that space on a time basis, is that it enables people to consider the other range of travel choices that they have available for the particular types of trips and the variety of, I suppose, trip purposes and destinations as well.
If I might add to that, with respect to providing for commuter parking, in the City of Port Phillip, the availability of large parking areas around transport nodes is actually quite low, and there are competing uses in those areas. For example, destination parking for people who have long stay requirements within the City of Port Phillip as well. So the provision of parking for commuters is certainly a very worthy consideration around transport nodes, but it rises up as more important in further away from the city, really, where at end-of-line locations on train lines, for example, it's very much to be supported. But it's where we've got rail in City of Port Phillip, there's, for example, Balaclava Station or Ripponlea Station, there's very little on-street or off-street parking availability, so providing for commuters specifically is very difficult.
Mr Walters, the recommendation is to reduce the all-day parking rate. Is that correct?
Have you got the rec in front of you there?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the recommendation under 1.4 of the Council report is a seasonal paid parking discount in respect to Waterfront Place from Tier A to Tier C. That moves it down to $1.80 per hour, and there would be a commensurate reduction in the maximum or all-day parking rate in that area as proposed, which is 3 hours, sorry, for a maximum parking stay.
I'm sorry, 3 hours?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. There is a 3p limit in respect to that area. In Station Pier.
So you can only stay there 3 hours. You can't stay there all day. There's no option for all-day parking. I want to be clear about that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct.
Councillor Brand.
Just to follow on from that question, what sort of outcome is expected or hypothesised in this experiment in terms of the behaviour that might change and the income that might change, the revenue that might change? I'm not saying you know what's going to happen, but what sort of findings are you expecting to?
Through you, Madam Mayor, through the trial is intended to understand a bit clearer about the seasonality of demand, but also to understand whether how much a play price does have in terms of attracting people to visit a particular area, in this instance Waterfront Place. And in terms of the cost or the income foregone from the council, it is estimated that conducting the winter trial will lead to a reduction in approximately $41,500 over that period.
And is that assuming that there'd be no change in demand? That would be the bottom line.
Yes, it's to assuming that there is no necessarily changes in terms of the number of parking transactions or number of visitors to that area. Is literally the difference in the price A at $5.10 currently and the new lower price.
Thank you. And if, for instance, the lower prices generated twice the amount of parking activity because people were just so delighted to have lower parking prices that twice the number of people turned up to use it, there'd be the measure of that would be no income loss, roughly speaking.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there'd be a less of a reduction in the income. It's double negative. But it would be less than $41,500 that would necessarily be lost in foregone income.
That's the sort of the measuring thing that we'd be watching.
That's right, and also to understand, again, the attractiveness of that location and the link between parking pricing and the attractiveness of that location.
And just one more on this line of questioning. Is the fact of the reduction in parking fees expected to be promoted and publicised, or is this a sort of a blind, just let it see what happens without telling anybody sort of experiment, or is it is the part of the experiment to see how much you can ramp up interest by lower?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's intended to communicate these changes to the relevant businesses and local community, and also using, and by doing so and disseminating the information, is also using existing, community and business representative groups and networks to enable the dissemination of that information about the change.
I've got another question around sort of what levers have been used in the MR Cagney report. As I said before, I fully support, the turnover, that we want to increase the turnover and that we don't want commuter parking. I'm just wondering, was anything requested in the brief to look at encouraging patronage of, businesses around certain parking locations? Were there things like price reductions after 6 p.m, like time also considered? I didn't read anything like that in the report. Thanks.
It's being overused. Through you, Madam Mayor, in respect to the MR Cagney report, it looked at a variety of factors. One was looking at the triggers for the review of parking controls, introduction and removal of paid parking and fee levels, looking at seasonal implications and stage implementation, as well as investigating the suitability of introducing parking controls or paid parking controls within Fisherman's Bend, and also devising a clear policy basis for the price structure benchmarks against other councils. But in respect to your question, it didn't necessarily look at things beyond necessarily the points that you have raised, but rather it was looking at the existing system. What it did point was that with having better data and technology that enables that data, is that you are able then to move to a more demand responsive approach, which may be able to elicit those types of changes you're talking about. But under the current technology that we have, we don't necessarily have that flexibility to vary the rates in real time or kind of across a day or a week at this point in time. So it points towards that without necessarily giving explicit recommendations on that.
Councillor Copsey.
I note in Section 3.15, there's reference to the need for us to have up-to-date occupancy data in order to inform an evidence-based parking policy going forward. I'm just wondering if officers can comment on the need for data gathering as part of the implementation and what's recommended in this report.
Through you, Madam Mayor, data collection and the ability to collect more readily occupancy data in particular is something that's critical to this, and something that we were seeking through the implementation of the changes. And one of the recommendations point to the strategic business case in respect to paid parking, and part of that is in respect to technology to enable that in more detail. What we currently use and would be seeking to use for the Waterfront Place trial at this stage would be seeking to look at transactional data from paid parking, as that is something that we can correlate with our existing data sets and then compare that what has happened after the fact as well. But it is something that we'll be seeking to do progressively as the trial unfolds.
Councillor Copsey.
Just a follow-up about what, if you could clarify, what's the minimum period that officers consider we need to conduct the extra data gathering in order to start reviewing the results proposed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of understanding and being able to track the data, it's useful, particularly from a financial sense, is to look at that on a quarterly basis in particular, because that gives us enough time to actually look at the transactional changes over a period. But noting in respect to the Waterfront Place trial is looking at ideally on a month-to-month basis in terms of parking transactions and being able to compare this winter with the June as proposed in 2018 to again get time series, as well as looking backwards in terms of trends that have happened or the transactional data from the same period in previous years as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr Bartels. Councillors, any further questions? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover of that or something different? Councillor Bond?
I'd like to propose an alternate recommendation, which
Can you please read your...
I'll turn around, see if I can read it. 1.1 notes the progress update on the development of the integrated transport strategy. 1.2 notes that a council report on a strategic business case for paid parking technology procurement and implementation will be presented at a future council meeting for decision. 1.3 endorses the draft parking policy objectives, triggers for reviewing parking controls and paid parking policy table as the basis for a paid parking policy as part of council's proposed parking management plan. 1.4 notes the following changes to paid parking operations to be introduced from 1st of July 2017 for a full year and subsequently reviewed. 1.4.1 Waterfront Place paid parking pricing discount from pricing tier A, $5.20 per hour, to pricing tier C, $1.80 per hour, and maximum daily rate charging from $12.60 to $8.50 from April through to September inclusive, and pricing tier B, $3.80 per hour from October through to March inclusive, for the periods of 1st of July 2017 to 30th of June 2019, a 2-year period. 1.4.2 South Melbourne removing the 10-minute free parking to provide consistent municipal-wide application. 1.4.3 Fitzroy Street precinct inclusive of side streets. Paid parking pricing discounts from pricing tier B, $3.80 per hour, to pricing tier C, $1.80 per hour, and a maximum daily rate charging from $12.60 to $8.50. From October through to September inclusive, and pricing tier B, $3.80 per hour from October through to March inclusive, 1st of July 2017 to 30th of June 2019. 1.5 informs the local community and implements on-street paid parking within the Sandridge and Montague neighbourhoods, supported by the introduction of appropriate time-based controls between Boundary Street and Bridge Street north of Williamstown Road, bounded by Inglis, Evans, Bridge Street to protect residential access to parking. 1.6 notes that as a result of recommendation 1.4, there is expected to be reduced income for council of approximately $150,000 excluding GST for a 3-month period, for a 12-month period during 2017-18. I can't quite read that last line. No, it's different. It's changed to that one. Where's the... Oh, there it is. Changes in income for other areas will be calculated and reported on a financial quarterly basis.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Bond?
Thank you.
Can you speak to your motion, please?
Fitzroy Street and Waterfront Place are both areas that are struggling economically. The transaction data for both areas have shown a steady decline over a 5 or 6 year period of approximately 30%. That is, there are 30% less people, cars, transactions using these locations versus 5 years ago. No business can thrive under these circumstances, and the impact is quite obvious at both locations. This alternative recommendation proposes some relief for both of these locations for a 6-month period over the winter period. I've proposed 2 years as it takes time for people to form habits and to change their behaviour and perception of an area. At the moment, both of these areas have a perception that the fee currently being charged to park there is not warranted. And in these circumstances such as this, it is appropriate for council to revise downwards its parking charges to reflect this perception. And that is what's proposed here tonight. A winter reduction to Category C for both Fitzroy Street and Waterfront Place, and a summer reduction from Category A to Category B for Waterfront Place. Fitzroy will stay on its current Category B for the summer period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Just before you, I've got a clarifying questions if I can. So I just note that you've just removed a couple of points there, Secretary. So are you okay with that, Councillor Bond? Excluding GST for the 12-month period, just took out for the 3-month? Yep. And I just note there's a typo as well. Bridge Street needs to be capital, so we could fix that. And also just wanted to check whether you wanted the maximum daily rate fees in there, given we don't do daily rates. Doesn't. Okay. Won't apply. All right then. Councillor Pearl, would you like to?
Just start by thanking officers for a very well-written, well-considered report, and we're fortunate to have you guys on the team here. In terms of you've obviously got the smarts around this stuff, and the municipality benefits greatly from that. So thank you for a report that was well-written and well-considered. I support the amendment. Having spent 12 years of my career trying to predict the elasticity of demand, and predict demand overall, I can tell you how hard that is, and it's almost a mission impossible. One way which is possible to do it is to change the price. So I hope the amended change that Councillor Bond has proposed, which isn't a trial as such, but it gives us the opportunity to determine how demand actually reacts versus the trend that you've been collecting over the past few years, albeit that you can never have enough data in these situations, but we're about to give you a data set that's altered based on the characteristics of a market, and hopefully they'll give you a little bit more information to be able to predict the elasticity of demand in one area, well, in 2 areas in particular. We're a bold council, and this is a bold decision, and to be frank, it may not work, and we might have to flip this at the end of it. My gut feeling tells me the assistance this will provide traders in 2 areas that require it will have primary benefits through increased patronage to those areas, and secondary benefits through more prosperous traders and more sustainable traders, which is why I support it. As I said to you, we're elected here to make decisions based on evidence, but we're also here to make decisions that we think are going to be bold and make change, and we don't always have enough data to make those decisions, but I think we've got sufficient evidence based on what I've seen to give this a go. And I think within the margin of error, I'm comfortable with the risk we're taking from a budget point of view. So let's give this a crack, let's be bold and help these two areas that need it. I support the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Baxter.
Hello. Okay. So, look, I'm speaking against this alternate motion. I would prefer the original motion that was on the agenda. The reason being is that we are in a position as councillors to make decisions based on data that we have. We've actually got reports and a lot of information from our councillors who have gone and done a lot of hard work. They've shown that despite anecdotal evidence that individual councillors may have received, that simply dropping the price in areas does not magically increase transactions, it does not magically bring people back. The evidence does not back that up. So I don't see any reason why we should throw out all of the evidence that we've actually been presented with here to simply say we know better because of anecdotal conversations that we may have had with people. So I think that it's an incredibly dangerous thing for us to do, to have a basically throw away $150,000, basically saying that we think this is going to reinvigorate and re-energise a particular area, when there's literally no evidence to show that that would actually be the case. As many conversations you can have with people that say they reckon this, they reckon that, we actually have data, we actually have information here, and I think that we are elected to make bold decisions, absolutely, but we should every single time try to back that up by data. And what I will say is that this is not a trial. The councillor that has put this alternate recommendation has actually made a decision. He thinks he knows best here, that he knows that this is going to stimulate transactions here. This is not a trial to find out whether it will. This is actually a decision that we're going to be making to actually give away this income because a councillor thinks it will help. We don't have any data to support that. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Just before I've got a clarifying question. I'd like to ask Mr. Chris Carroll about what the budget are you able to validate the $150,000 as a budget impact?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to review the calculations on the number, and given that we're adopting the budget tonight, it's pretty important. The officers who've had a quick look at this, a rough guess, suggesting the gross impact's more like 200,000. The net impact on the budget, because we've already incorporated about 41 or 42 on the budget tonight, would be the 200 less the 42, so more like 158,000, and that would go through for the next 2 financial years.
Okay, thanks for clarifying, Mr. Carroll. Councillor Crawford.
So I am speaking in support of this amendment. I worked on Fitzroy Street for 13 years, and there are several things I'd like to note in regards to this. So obviously I have been witness to what has occurred on Fitzroy Street, and there are many factors that bring to it, and similar to Waterfront Place. However, we are charged as councillors to look to ways that we can support our community, and that takes many different forms. So one of the things, unfortunately, that I note is that these kind of, the integrated transport strategy takes a long time, and these businesses are crying out for help right now. So it's before any of the big to long-term decisions we're going to be making are probably at least 6 months or more away. So I feel that time is of the essence in this situation. I also note that many other areas in the municipality have benefited permanently from no paid parking, and have had benefits around that. And And I think that in a time of need where there are areas that perhaps, not that it is the foolproof way to improve business, but that it is one way that perhaps we can allow them a bit more leniency to keep their businesses going, which we want for a vibrant city. I note that it may be of benefit for us to allow them to have a little bit of relief. I also note that given that the whole point of parking paid is to turn over traffic in peak areas where over, I think it's 80% it refers to in the report, when there's 80% usage at all times. I do not think that these areas hit those marks, and Fitzroy Street definitely shouldn't be categorised as Tier B in the winter months. However, that's why I asked Councillor Bond to reconsider around having the summer and winter rates, because there are a lot more tourists and there are more peak times over the summer period. So I just wanted to say that also perhaps if there is an increase in business, we will make up some of that revenue if there are more people parking in that area. So it may not be exactly that amount that we are, looking to waiver. But I do think that we have a responsibility, given that some of the data collection and the kind of theories that we're going to be thinking about, considering all the areas in the municipality that have not had paid parking forever, that we should give a little bit of relief to some of our traders who need a hand right now.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to ask, test the question around the claim that's been made that reducing parking fees on Fitzroy Street in particular will stimulate business. We haven't seen any data or any information to support that view. It may well be the case, but I did hear from Councillor Bond and Councillor Crawford a few weeks ago that closure of the Gatwick will stimulate business on Fitzroy Street. Now it's paid parking. I just need a bit more evidence before we move down that track. We're working towards an integrated transport strategy here. The report from the officers is very detailed, and the plan set out for how we'll get to a point where we can make more concise and evidence-based decisions around parking fees in the municipality is really clearly set out. And as a result, I am a bit concerned about the late recommendation to change the fee in some of the other areas, given that we haven't properly priced out those fees, and we haven't considered them in the context of where our budget is currently and what the implication on the municipality will be. The integrated transport strategy will get us to a point where we can make these decisions. We can take into consideration Fitzroy Street and other precincts that might need price changes in order to address some of the broader issues that we're having in the municipality. But for right now, I'd like to thank the officers for the very detailed report and pages of reporting that they've done to get us to the point where we have a very clear way forward to address an integrated transport strategy, and look forward to working towards that, hopefully with the originally proposed recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Simic. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Mayor Voss. I will speak. I'm going to speak against the alternate recommendation. I echo some of the comments that have been made by Councillors Baxter and Simic tonight. We actually have evidence before us. We've heard from our officers this evening that in the past there has been, and correct me if I'm wrong please, but what I heard is that there has been a previous trial of reduction in fees on a seasonal basis in Waterfront Place, and what we've seen from the preliminary evidence would indicate that there's at the very least a low correlation between that drop in demand and a drop in pricing and a response in terms of transactions, and in fact that transactions decreased over that period. Thank you for confirming that understanding. So what we have here tonight is a roll of the dice by Councillor Bond at a very late stage that has significant budgetary implications. Everybody wants to see our villages thriving, and we have a responsibility as councillors to take the evidence that's presented to us and direct our resources in the way that best enables us to benefit our community and support our community. We don't. I agree that with Councillor Simich's comment that we don't know that the proposed reduction in seasonal rates would produce any beneficial outcome for traders on Fitzroy Street or Waterfront Place. But what I can absolutely guarantee is that losing $150,000 from our council budget will impact our ability to deliver programs that we've spent a long time coming to a conclusion about our priorities in our budget that we're due to accept this evening. I have a lot of sympathy, and I endorse the intention behind this, but I think that we need to make sure that when we're making such decisions that could have such a severe budgetary implication, that they're well supported by the evidence, and I don't feel confident on that tonight. What I do feel confident is that the officers have gone to extreme lengths to make sure that we're setting ourselves up well in the future for a parking policy that helps us to achieve the many outcomes that you can influence through paid parking. That's not only helping the vibrancy of our villages, but also affecting mode shift and so on. So I won't be supporting the alt-rec tonight. I think that if we take the officer's recommendation that's reported, we'll actually be in a better position in future to create an evidence-based parking policy that does help us to support our local traders. And I look forward to the information that we're going to get back through the parking trial, which will enable us to use this tool in a way that produces equitable outcomes and really benefits our community.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Brand.
I'll be supporting this, the alternative recommendation, on the basis that Fitzroy Street is an exceptional case at the moment. It's the only in the study area of report that we've been considering. Between 2015 and 2016, it's the only area out of the 10 areas covered that actually lost revenue. It lost parking revenue reduced in that year by $60,000. I don't know what's happened since, but we're obviously losing revenue as it is. This is a hunch type idea that it might actually reverse that trend, possibly, or slow it, or whatever. It is certainly a very big hunch, which is held by the local traders. It's a hunch that I don't hold nearly as strongly, but it's a possibility. I think by going with it, rather than trying to sort of keep some sort of pure experimental database untrammelled by considerations like this, I don't think that the purity of the experiment is it's a nice idea, but I don't think it's a really realistic idea in this case. All of the data collected from all of the different parts are from idiosyncratic places, and it all has to be interpreted. And we're not destroying the data by changing one of the parameters. We are making the data more complicated to interpret, but it is not destroying the experiment at all. It might suggest other things which, again, would be more complicated to interpret, as opposed to somewhere where all of the controls are exactly the same. All of the controls are never going to be exactly the same in this. And I think we're in an emergency situation. It's like if we were doing a medical experiment, that we would be saying, well, here's a patient who's really suffering from a particular disease, but we won't treat them so that we can see whether they would survive or not in sort of against the general population. I think it's quite reasonable to disrupt the purity of an experiment for the sake of doing the best short-term fix and seeing how that works, and make sure that the sophisticated analysis of parking revenue and what have you in the coming year and years is sophisticated and subtle, and we'll deal with it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Before I go to you, Councillor Bond, I'll also say a few words as well. First of all, I'd just like to thank the officers, for how much work has been involved, and as you can see by all of us, talking about this subject, it is very complex, and we don't underestimate, the task at hand here. But one of the reasons, the primary reason for having parking is not just for collecting revenue, and I think we have to be very clear about that. So it's not our primary reason. It's a great thing because we can do other things with it, but it's actually not. The primary reason. It's for other things such as, increasing turnover so everyone has the option to park somewhere should they need to. It's for, decreasing the commuter traffic and parking issues. And I would also like to encourage that the objectives also include helping our businesses to be more stable and sustainable and encourage patronage, which I don't think is something that's in the current list of objectives that's there. So I would like one of the first options up there in the motion is to endorse our draft objectives, and I would like that to be reviewed, perhaps going forward. I am very supportive of the seasonal adjustment, which was the officer's recommendation for Waterfront Place. This just looks at it for a little longer, which on my understanding and memory for the Waterfront Place trial, it didn't go long enough, and that was part of the reason why it didn't fail. It failed initially. So I think it needs to go longer as per this recommendation by Councillor Bond. I'm very supportive of the Sandridge actions. I don't think we've heard about them at all tonight, and I think that should be great. At the moment, that is all commuter parking, pretty much, and I think we need to adjust and work appropriately there. But I think, if we don't try this, we'll actually never know, and I think that's one of the key reasons for me looking at, certainly supporting this motion. In Waterfront Place specifically, we've got 120 plus cruise ships coming in the next cruise ship season, which is the summer period. There is no doubt. It is busy at that time. But winter, you can, fire a cannon through that area. There is really nobody there. I certainly endorse this alternative motion. Thank you. Councillor Bond, would you like to close?
Just this proposal is not based on a guess or anecdotal evidence. It's based on actual analysis of actual transaction data for both locations over a 5-year period. The report in front of us tonight shows that Fitzroy Street lost 25,000 transactions in the last 12 months. Yes, that equates to $60,000, but that equates to 25,000 transactions out of 118,000 transactions on the street. Roughly 22% of the transactions on Fitzroy Street have disappeared in the last 12 months. That suggests we have a problem there. And all my fellow councillors are free to request this same information from the officers that I've requested over the last couple of years and analyse that same information over the past couple of years, and I'm sure you will come to the same conclusion that I've reached. Also, I analysed the previous trial, and I don't recall there being a decrease in transactions. I recalled an increase in transactions but a decrease in revenue. Asked a question earlier what the exact numbers were. Haven't been provided with them, but I'm happy to be corrected after the meeting if my recollection is not correct. Therefore, I would like to, I guess we put this to the vote and thank those councillors who, for the time and efforts and their kind words this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Then I will now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Bond has requested a division, so I'll put that vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Crawford, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Voss, Councillor Bond, Councillor Brand. All those against? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Simic and Councillor Copsey. That motion is carried. Thank you. All right, now we'll go back to the first item on the agenda, which is the Council Plan 2017 to 2027 and the budget for 2017-2018, the adoption. So, councillors, we've got one member of the public that's requested to speak. That's Mr. Charles Palais. Have I said that right? Mr. Barre, I apologise if I've said your name incorrectly. Please state your name and suburb for the record.
Charles Barre is my name. No mispronunciation. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm from West St Kilda, and I speak this evening on behalf of the West St Kilda Residents Association, that is WISCRA. For 18 years, WISCRA has been tirelessly facilitating communication in our neighbourhood on a vast range of issues. For 18 years, we've been advocating on residents' behalf. And underpinning our advocacy is a belief that residents' views should be put, heard and heeded. WISCRA appreciates, Madam Mayor, that councillors have had the opportunity to examine our brief submission in relation to the council plan, both in full and in summary. WISCRA also accepts that councillors have had the opportunity to examine staff advice on our submission. It's on only one aspect of our submission that WISCRA speaks at this point tonight. A key question for us, and we submit for council, is where is West St Kilda? Simple question. West St Kilda lies between Beaconsfield Parade and the light rail line. Also, Google Maps tells us that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. Wikipedia tells us that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. Whereis.com tells us that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. Profile ID tells us that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. Melways, what would they know? They tell us that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. And for 18 years, West St Kilda residents and WISCRA have believed that the other boundaries are West Beach Road and Fraser Street. The City of Port Phillip? Oh no, they know better. The council plan is big on neighbourhoods, big on communities, big on communications. But what does the council plan do? It divides the West St Kilda community. It divides our neighbourhood in two. The council plan lumps about 40% of West St Kilda in with Middle Park and Albert Park. It puts most of West St Kilda in with St Kilda, an area separated from our neighbourhood by Fitzroy Street, an area which even takes in a little bit of Elwood, and an area in which neighbourhood interests and concerns are quite divorced from and have little in common with those of West St Kilda. Madam Mayor, you and your councillors are advised by your staff that that's the way the city's been doing it for 20 years. More the shame, we say. We certainly wouldn't be boasting about carving up a community, a neighbourhood, let alone proclaiming that we've been doing it for 20 years. Councillors are advised that the boundaries, and I quote, are intended to delineate areas that members of the community identify with. West St Kilda residents most emphatically do not identify with areas east of Fitzroy Street, nor with Elwood or Albert Park. Councillors are advised that, and I quote again, this supports the objective to ensure council is responsive to the particular needs of neighbourhood communities. Carving up West St Kilda and casting the bits in with other places here and there most assuredly does not ensure that council responds to the particular needs of the West St Kilda community. Indeed, as the council plan shows, just the opposite is the case. Of the 58 amenities, festivals and significant events listed in the plan for St Kilda West, Albert Park and Middle Park, of the 58, only 2 are actually in West St Kilda. Of the 29 investments to be made in those areas this year, 2017-18, of the 29 investments, only 2 are actually in West St Kilda. Doesn't sound to Whisker as if the carve-up helps council respond to the particular needs of the West St Kilda community. Councillors are also advised that in Year 2 or Year 3 of the council plan, on the back of detailed community consultation, changes could be in the wind. The residents, that is not the residents of Elwood, not the residents of Albert Park, but the residents of West St Kilda most fervently hope that that change occurs. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Barre. Councillors, there are no more members of the public that have requested to speak to this item. Do you have any questions of the officers? I'd like to take up that question, please, from Mr Barre, if I could. Well, at least part of it, on how we identify our locations.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The neighbourhoods in the council plan are based on the neighbourhoods that have been in our planning scheme through our municipal strategic statement for a very long time. In fact, I'd say probably close to 20 years. So it's an established artefact that is we're enshrining in the council plan. Having said that, though, the municipal strategic statement is up for review this year and is going to be a very extensive process. It's a statutory requirement that we're required to undertake every 4 years. So I imagine a review of the boundaries will be included in that review. They're certainly designed to reflect what we think are the actual neighbourhoods in the place, irrespective of suburb boundary or ward boundary. If the community feels differently, well, then I'm sure those views will be taken into account at the time.
Thank you, Ms Harris. I will note, you know, that there's many places in those areas that are not mentioned. For example, I just think in Port Melbourne, and it doesn't actually specifically mention Fisherman's Bend, which is actually not the urban renewal part of Fisherman's Bend. It's the old, it's the old part of Fisherman's Bend. It doesn't mention Beacon Cove or Garden City either. It just talks about Port Melbourne, and there might be some, you know, proprietary, you know, concern about that as well. So I think we probably do need to take this into account when we review our municipal strategic statement.
We're happy to do that, Madam Mayor.
Councillors, any other questions on our council plan? Yes, Councillor Pearl.
Just quickly, this is good to finally get to this point. How will the community keep us honest in terms of scorecards, etc., if assuming this council plan is adopted this evening? We hope we set a reasonably high bar, and they should keep us to account at every minute to ensure that we're delivering on the plan which we're voting on tonight.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Pearl's correct. This is a key accountability mechanism with the community. It's what I like to see referred to as a contract with the community for the rates and the fees and charges that they provide to us, for the trust that they provided to the council and the assets that we hold on their behalf. This is what we promise to deliver. In terms of an accountability framework, this document goes well beyond what this council has previously had in terms of its measurement framework. It provides a range of measures at an outcome, at a service, a project and an organisational level, which enables us to measure performance at both at a city-wide perspective, at a council perspective and also as an organisation. And that reporting on those and that measurement framework will take place in several different ways, but As you'd know through the CEO report that you receive each month, the CEO report will be restructured to focus on how we're going against delivering this plan. And you'll get regular updates on a monthly basis, which will go to the community about how we're performing on a range of all those different kind of scorecards. And also it forms the basis of our annual report each year, which is an audited document from the Auditor General. But there'll be a range of other specific pieces of communication with the community as well throughout the year on specific topics, how we're going on our transformations, how we're going financially, how we're going on specific project delivery.
Thank you, Mr Carroll. Councillor Copsey.
This might be a tricky one, but I think our officers are, as usual, well prepared. Given the motion that was just passed by this council, there will be, I presume, consequences for the budget that's to be adopted tonight. If officers could please speak to the budgetary impact of the decision that was just made.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. I think we need to have an alternative recommendation put in tonight that enables us to update the budget to reflect the impact of that decision. We are still working through precisely what that impact would be, but I'm based on the initial information from officers, I think it's around $158,000 per annum for the 2 years. We are able to fortunately accommodate that because of the strong financial position that the organisation is in and the disciplined approach you've taken to developing your budget. However, it will reduce the capacity that you have to respond to other emerging issues and the contingency that we sort of budgeted for to help deal with that. For instance, and you would have seen recently with the Grenfell disaster in London and the lacrosse building incident that happened more recently here, or not more recently here, but recently here. There's some work that we'll need to do, and we haven't quite costed that yet, and we'll need to come back to you during the year when we've done that. And there's some other issues that the organisation no doubt will face, and that just reduces your capacity somewhat.
Councillor Pearl.
Just on that, would you consider a $158,000 variance to our budget a substantial risk?
It won't, through you, Madam Mayor, it won't materially change. If you look at the VARGO financial sustainability indicators, Victorian Auditor General financial sustainability indicators that we use to benchmark our budget, it won't have a material impact in the short term.
I'd just like to ask, how many actual objectives do we have in... Is that something we've counted in the council plan? That's okay if you don't know off your top of your head. It's fine.
Madam Mayor, I think we have around 120 different ones and we have about 100 different indicators. So it is quite a significant undertaking, but it hangs together very coherently, and one of the things that we've been doing since the exhibition of the draft is thinking through exactly the sort of issues that Councillor Pearl has raised. How are we going to work with this document? How are we going to ensure ongoing transparency and accountability? And how do we ensure that every member of our staff has a role and sees the contribution that they will make in delivering the plan? And we're very confident in the final draft that we've achieved a plan that will do that.
So probably another question. How are we going to promote this? So we've had over 2,000 people that have participated in our engagement around this council plan. How are we going to let people know that's finalised?
Madam Mayor, we will first and foremost respond to all of our submitters, our 125 submitters, with a very detailed response which is outlined in the attachment to tonight's report. We have a very compelling summary of the plan that has been designed and is going to go out to our residents as an insert into the next edition of the Diversity magazine. And there will be an assortment of other sort of promotional initiatives. It will be available at our town halls, on our website, and it will also be, its final publication will be announced through all of the engagement participants that we've had all the way through the process since the beginning of the year. So I think we'll get everybody.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? We have a officers adjusted recommendation. Let me just see what that is. Does somebody want to move that one? Councillor Simic? You might need to go to the second page for the adjustment, please. Is there another page to this, please? Okay, can you just explain where the change is, please? Okay, so we'll just need to update the officer's recommendation.
Should read, so I've got it here, the final part of that should be to incorporate the decision of Council tonight on agenda item 8.4 regarding paid parking to reflect an anticipated further reduction of revenue during 2017-18 and 2018-19. So we won't put the figure in because we haven't costed that yet. So just we note that there's further reduction and basically delegated me to adjust it to reflect that decision under 8.4 once we've done the costing. So it should during 2017-18 and 2018-19. I think there's a 2-year impact, Mr. Carroll.
Councillor Simic, are you wanting to move that officer's recommendation? Yes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as we've been going through this tonight, I've been reflecting on the actual journey that we've been on since before we were elected. During our election campaigns, a lot of us went out and spoke to the community about the issues that were most important to them. The 9 of us were eventually elected, and I remember thinking at the time that we've got about a week to get all of this work done and to make sure that we've got a clear and concise plan going forward. I was relieved when I found out that we had a bit extra time. Over the last 7 months, we've been working on this intensively as a group. Started very early on with us identifying what some of our key issues were, talking to officers about that, working with officers, and officers coming back to us, costing some of our ideas, bringing forward suggestions, which were all of them implemented in our draft strategy. There was, of course, compromises that had to be made by all councillors. Unfortunately, none of us were able to get absolutely everything that we wanted in the council plan, but through very respectful processes, we did come to a good outcome. We then had community consultation process, which went for quite a while. It was more intensive than we've ever had before, was more in-depth than we've had before, and I was very proud of that. At the same time, the budget was developing, and in leadership, Mr. Carroll, who and other officers who made all of that come together and made sure that the budget was reflective of ideas and plans for the council plan. We then came up with a second draft, which went out for community review we've again listened to the community and made sure that we've implemented as many of the recommendations that were made as possible. The council plan as it stands is in a really good place. The budget that's been integrated and built into the council plan is in a really good place. Organisations in a good place. But this will be an iterative process over the next 4 years as we continue to look at the council plan and continue to make changes as is required and as we respond to changing circumstances in our community. I was speaking to some of the officers earlier today who said that they were looking forward to tonight because this gives them, working for the organisation, a really clear pathway forward and very clear direction going forward as well. So I look forward to working with the rest of the councillors, with the community, with the officers in implementing our council plan. Look forward to future discussions about how we can continue to do things better and as we identify things that we need to action. But as a whole, I'd like to take the time to thank everyone for, particularly the officers, for the enormous amount of work that they've done responding to the ideas and questions that councillors have put forward. And to say that I very much look forward to the next phase, which is making sure that we get all of the things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. I would largely echo Councillor Simic's words. I certainly found it a really interesting and quite exciting process, which I didn't really expect it to be. But I really do want to thank the officers a lot. I felt like as a new councillor that I feel like I was given every chance to to put my policies, the platform that I stood in election and my community's interests forward, and I certainly felt the degree of support from officers was huge and generous and intelligent and understanding, and I was incredibly impressed, and I feel that if I had have performed better as a councillor myself, I would have only got a lot more out of council. I don't feel like I was being in any way held back from what I could have achieved in my sort of interest in this, and I feel all the other councillors probably feel very much the same. I'd certainly like to thank, I don't know whether it's right to pick out councillors, but certainly Chris Carroll and Melissa Hazel, I think are the ones that we have felt were the focus for us, and they've been absolutely awesome, I think. But obviously there are other officers around them, above them, below them, who've put in just as much behind the scenes and what have you, and I want to thank all of them. The other party that I do want to thank is the community that had a huge input at the beginning, thanks to the huge community consultation structures that our officers set up on our behalf. And that was great. It was actually very engaging, and I think probably a more fruitfully engaging process than it has been in the past. And I think that the members of the community probably felt more aware of the process this time than in other times in the past too. And I want to thank the community in particular for the submissions they made to the draft council plan, which was a massive lump of material that we had to look at. And I think it was a very, very impressive contribution that members of the community made. Particularly organisations. There are several organisations that put in very substantial, well-researched, well-considered submissions that took them a structured month of work in the community to put together with working groups and drafts, and then really going through a process which in certain ways mimics, the amount of effort and structural work that goes on in council. And I thought that was a great compliment and a great service. There were probably half a dozen or maybe 8 organisations that did that to a greater or larger extent, which was very, very impressive. all done in very good spirit, very little, I guess, unnecessary hostility. A lot of...
It was all necessary.
All the hostility was necessary, yes. All done with, I think, a great spirit of appreciation of what Council was doing and optimism about it, and but not lacking in any way, a critical, a critical perspective. So there's a lot of people to thank, and I'm thankful for having been able to be a part of it. It's good.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Baxter?
Yes, thank you. Look, I'm also really excited to get to this point. I feel like I've been working towards this for a lot longer than the 7 or so months that it actually has been. And I think the process has been amazing, particularly the community engagement, which really happened right from the beginning. And I particularly enjoyed going to some of those pop-up stalls and having people come up and talk about what they love about the city, what they would like to improve, and those sorts of things were really, really great conversations. And even just having people play with the little avatar app about what avatar they could end up with was always really fun. I mean, Councillor Bond was very pleased to find out he was a social justice defender on there, and not a business bandicoot or whatever we had on there. It was a robust process, and I was really pleased with that. In terms of the plan itself, the plan is actually an excellent document. It's really comprehensive and intensive. It goes into lots and lots of detail where it needs to, and it's very, very high level where it needs to be. It's also quite navigable, and when you just want to find what you want to look for, you can go and find what you want to look for without having to wade through. It's a quite weighty document, and so all of that I'm really pleased with. There are a couple of things in there that I'm particularly proud of. So we've got in there, increased funding for drainage and water management in Elwood, which was a particular concern of myself, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Gross, and also just some really good setting out a framework of how we're going to progress towards more flood mitigation efforts in that area, which was really, really pleasing. Personally, I have a passion for renewable energy and emissions reduction, and Council's efforts in that respect in our council plan are really, really pleasing, and that we're going to be doing things like getting a baseline of community emissions and investigating whether or not an energy foundation is something that would be beneficial to our community. Those are things that I'm quite proud of, and there are plenty of other things there as well. But I think in the end, as Councillor Brand was saying, if you can look at the document and say, this has had my input, this has the unmistakable stamp of Baxter on it, as it does everybody else here, then you can say to the people that elected you, I've gone there and done everything I can to put my vision that I presented to you at the election into action here. So it's really, really fantastic to have this plan. We're going to spend the next however many years implementing it, which is really, really important. But I just want to say that I'm very, very proud, and to also echo the thanks to all of the council officers who have worked tirelessly to put this together. And I know what they put us through was gruelling, so what they put themselves through must have been even worse than that. So you guys really are suckers for punishment, but I guess you're in local government, so what are you going to do? But anyway, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to come in the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Cropsey?
I would, and we're going to sound like a broken record, but I think each councillor is very proud of the effort that's gone into this document, both from a personal perspective. The effort that the organisation has put in has been magnificent, and also the effort that the community has put in. A number of councils have spoken about the really impressive submissions that we received and the high quality of thought that's gone into people's input. So thank you to my colleagues for a robust debate and a respectful one where we all managed to, I think, bring diverse views to bear in this document. Thank you very much to the organisation and our fantastic officers. This is a groundbreaking document in that it integrates a number of documents we're required to produce. It shows the budget alongside the council plan so that it's easy for community members to see what's being spent where. And it also includes the health and wellbeing objectives, which are crucial to us fulfilling our role as a municipal authority. And it's, on top of that, I think it looks beautiful and it's navigable. So kudos for achieving that. It's a real, you've really managed to just pull that off beautifully. Finally, thank you once again to our community. We're really blessed in the city of Port Phillip to have an engaged community, a community that's not afraid to interact with us here in local government, and we're very glad of that. We really appreciate the thorough and considered input. I had a wonderful time speaking with many community members at the pop-ups and going through the submissions and just seeing the quality of ideas come through. I hope that you see your vision for Port Phillip reflected in this document as well as the council's. And thank you for being part of the conversation. Let's continue it over this next 4 years.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Pearl.
The time's come for us, obviously, to get on and get this done, so I'll be fairly quick, but thank God we're at this point. This plan was developed with energy of councillors' integrity, and now we move to the best bit, which was action. I think the document is a good balance between the flexibility to adapt to what is a changing world, whilst also ensuring that us as a council is accountable to implement the commitments and the actions that we've undertaken in this document. So it's really the first document I've seen of its kind where the community should be pretty clear on what we've said we're going to do, how we're going to pay for it, and what the measures of success are. And I would encourage all of our community to keep us accountable. If you're unhappy with it, make sure you're vocal about it. The thing that underpins everything in this document and the decision, for example, we made earlier tonight, that we should be grateful for is our predecessors that came before us. I've often been a vocal critic of the way some former councillors have spent money in council decisions, but the reason we have the ability to invest under this council plan is because of the fiscal responsibilities of the people that sat in these chairs before us, and that's a debt that we owe to those people. And frankly, one of the first decisions this council made to invest in the Pride Centre, which frankly trashed the underwriting result for the operating result for this council plan, was able to be made because of the decisions that were made before us. So the real test of the success of this council will be achieving the actions under the plan, but also giving a balance sheet and a set of funded projects to the next council that gives them the same luxury, and also provides a moat around the council in the event that we have to act in unforeseen economic events, which is critically important. So thanks to my colleagues, and second everything that's been said about the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? I will also then. I just wanted to remind councillors that this process started right after the election, and we went off site. And if you remember, it was at that place there that a lot of the downloads started to happen, and that we really. And it was also there that I'm very thankful that we started to develop the good relationship that we have together. And I wanted to thank our community and the 125 submitters for the terrific feedback which has helped shape this plan. And as I said before, more than 2,000 people participated in our engagement, which is really, and have taken the time to share their vision, priorities and ideas with us. So the first time, we're actually taking a longer term view of our budgets and our projects and setting out what we want to achieve by 2027. In one clear document that meets all of our legislative requirements. So I think that's, as you said, Councillor Pearl, amazing. Engagement with our community will continue throughout the delivery and the annual review of this plan, and that's what our commitment is to our community. Strong governance and increased efficiency is the foundation for us achieving the plan's outcomes, and we'll measure this regularly and report on our progress often. I'd like to really thank my fellow councillors for this plan. I think it's a terrific council plan, and together we've actually made it a great council plan. I'd also like to thank our officers for putting into words on paper, you know, what our ambitions are, and I think that's been a marvellous job that you've done. We've got, as you mentioned, Ms Harris, 120 objectives, around 100 indications that will actually see us through, so that's a great outcome. So I think that it really summarises that our city is a community that's bold, inviting, livable, caring, beautiful and real. Thank you. I endorse this motion. And Councillor Simic, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Well done. I'm going to go to item 8.2 next, and then I know there's quite a few people here for 8.5. So do 8.2 next, which is the declaration of rates and charges for 2017-18. I think they do need to go together from memory. Councillors, we don't have any members of the public that have requested to speak to that item. Are there any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl?
Just quickly on the special rate that's applied to some of the districts, the 3 districts, to fund the relevant business associations. I'm not familiar with the St Kilda based ones, but the Port Melbourne one I am reasonably familiar with, and very happy with a number of the things they do. I'm just wondering if you could provide the details of what feedback you've collected from the special ratepayers regarding the effectiveness of the special rates and the associations themselves.
Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of informal feedback, our officers meet with the Business Association Committee on a monthly basis, and there is a report that is provided through Council, which is a report against the key performance indicators, which demonstrates through their practical feedback how they deliver the special rate.
Just to follow up, do we actually get that from the ratepayers themselves, the people actually paying the rate? Like the direct feedback from the... So in our CEO report, we have abundant amounts of feedback from ratepayers that are paying property rates, for example, but the people that are actually paying these rates that are funding the association, what primary data do we gather from them?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there is, at the time of the renewal of the special rate, the opportunity for each of the contributors to the special rate to provide feedback, as there is a consultation period at that time. The special rate is a 5-year rate, and so we do not formally on an annual basis receive feedback from the individuals, but rather it is through the committee. But to clarify, that is the committee of each association.
I have a question about the Melbourne Camera Club, and just wondering how they fit into the list of those which were given dispensations, if you like, or discounts. All the others seem to be sport. They seem to be...
Through you, Madam Mayor. This is through the Cultural and Recreational Lands Act, which enables, it's not just for sporting organisations, it's broader than that. It's for other organisations such as cultural, recreational or similar facilities or objectives, or clubs or activities that promote these things. The Melbourne Camera Club is a not-for-profit organisation run by and for photography enthusiasts. the records show that the club's been receiving a 25% rate waiver since about 2005.
Mr. Carroll, has that been reviewed? Would they still qualify? It just seems there's a lot of not-for-profits in our municipality. Is it just because they own the building that they get this?
I can't, through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure. I can't answer that now, whether it's just because they own the building. All I can say is that what's been told to me is that they comply with the criteria and the requirements and are therefore eligible to receive the waiver.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Along that line of questioning, can I please ask further to that, and perhaps it might be taken on notice? So is that criteria that is it if you know about it and apply and you fit the criteria, you would get it, and that quite possibly there are groups that don't know about it to apply, or is it a really specific? I guess I'm interested in finding out what that criteria looks like that gets applied, to have more detail around. I mean, obviously not necessarily in not passing the report tonight, but just to find out, are there other groups that should know about it, or is it a really specific thing that they fit into? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we'll take that on notice and report back.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Just on the waivers, so the percentage amount, for the example, the Melbourne Camera Club applied for, presumably in 2005, to get a discount on the rates bill. How do the associations listed there? Do they apply annually for the dispensation? Do they apply once and we just hold it there for the how's it reviewed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the process involves on an annual revaluation process. So every 2 years it gets revalued, and if the property doesn't change its use or activity, then it still qualifies.
Sorry, just to clarify, I'm asking about the dispensation that council provides. So, for example, the Melbourne Camera Club, we provide a 20% discount dispensation to that association, which they applied for in 2015. It's 2005. So, how do the clubs detailed there? Do they apply for that dispensation on a once-off basis and then it carries forward to perpetuity? Do they apply for it every second year or annually? How do we make an assessment whether or not those? Obviously, in 2005, the council made a decision that this association or club met the criteria. How in 2017 do we know they still meet that criteria?
So, based on the use, the land use, if the land use hasn't changed, so the previous, decision would still apply until a change in land use.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so they make the initial application. It's considered about, does it apply? Every second year through the evaluation process, we test whether there's been any change of use. If there hasn't, then it continues to roll on without further application being required.
I've also got another question. The Ministry of Housing. So is that a statewide or Australia-wide discount as well? And I'd like to understand who actually pays on their behalf, and why do they get a discount when they use the same amount of, things within the community?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd have to get some more detail on the specifics. It's through the Department of Human Services, and there's an agreement in place. In terms of its applicability beyond the council in Victoria and the details behind that, I'd need to take that on notice and come back to you.
One further question, the promotional flyers in the rate notice. What's the current content that's going out, and is there other materials that we should send? Is that what processes are there to determine what goes in those rate notices?
The rate notices themselves contain obviously the property valuation, the level of rates that's to be charged on that particular property. There is a range of additional information that we provide that goes with the rates notice. There's a brochure that talks at more of a summary level about the budget. So where does your rate dollar go? What are the key decisions that have been made as part of the budget? We'll work with the councillors on developing that material as we have in previous years. There's also a flyer regarding e-notices. We're promoting that that ratepayers move towards getting e-notices of their rates notice rather than getting it through the mail. I'm pleased to say we've just up around over 7.5%. We introduced it only a year or so ago, and we've got some plans that will hopefully see that increase to over 20% in the next 6 months or so.
Terrific. Any other councillors? Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Brand.
Yes, just a couple of questions. My computer's gone down again, so I can't find it. It might have gone all the way to heaven, yeah. Or hell, down, I don't know. The rate increase this year under the rate capping, I can't find the figure exactly of what we ended up doing. Do we know that we ended up, is that something which we say definitively which we have done?
The dollar value?
Percentage value I'm interested in.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we comply with rates cap at 2%.
Okay. And what's the relationship between the percentage under that 2% and the actual the uniform rate levied in the dollar? Is that how that's sort of more or less calculated? The 3.9 cents.
Through you, Madam Mayor, on a non-revaluation year, the 2% applies to the rate in the dollar.
Sorry, 2% applies
to the rate in the dollar. So the rate in the dollar will increase by 2% on a non-revaluation year, which is 17-18. So when the property gets revalued, the rate in dollar will change up or down depending on the value of the property in the municipality.
Can I continue? So, because revaluation happens every second year, if we were to compare the rate in the dollar this year with last year, that wouldn't be an appropriate comparison. But if we compared it to the year before, we might see a valid trend.
So the answer to that is it will be a 2% increase on the rate in the dollar of 2016-17.
So can you then? So when we look at 3.9287 cents in the dollar, how does that? I just want to compare it with what we did last year and the year before, perhaps, just to see how it's trending. But I don't know. But it is obviously complicated by whether it's a revaluation year or not.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and Mr. Liu will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the comparison for the cents in the dollar for 17-18 compared to 16-17 is a 2% increase. The year prior, where we had a revaluation, it would be less transparent because it's dependent on the valuation of the property, all properties in the municipality, and it moves by greater or lesser amounts. So if you want to compare the 17-18 rate in the dollar, which is 3.9287 cents, to the NAV in 2016-17, which was 3.851 cents, it's a 2% change.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just need to clarify, because to me, and I don't know whether I'm right on this, but to me, it's something which I like to be able to tell ratepayers that we are charging a certain amount per the value of their property, and I like to be able to tell them. I love to be able to tell them that we're actually charging less and less as their properties increase in value and what have you. That'd be a nice story to tell, and so I'd be interested what what the rate in the dollar was at the last similar year as this, 2 years ago? I mean, it doesn't have to be now, but I'd be interested to have that information and also to be told how relevant it is. It seems relevant to me, but I might be touting the wrong figure. I'm not sure.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have the 15-16 rate in the dollar in front of me. I can certainly provide that information afterwards. What I can say is that very clearly the increase from 16-17 to 17-18 is a 2% change.
Thank you, Mr Carroll. Any further questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Bond to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Bond. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Pearl.
It's a good achievement that we've been able to meet the rate capping challenge, particularly in a world where ratepayers are paying through the nose for increased electricity prices. I don't know too many people's wages that are going up at the moment more than 2%. So in a world where that's getting more complex and more expensive, the council's met the challenge this year, and that challenge will compound going forward. But it's also a huge opportunity for us to do a lot more in the council with less coming in from ratepayers. In any case, I guess I would foreshadow that I'd like to look more into the special rate obligations and the transparency around the effectiveness of those taxes effectively that we're levying on traders. We have ample data, transparent data that comes to us about satisfaction from normal ratepayers. Those special ratepayers should have the same satisfaction. As I said before, my experience with one of those traders associations has been nothing but complimentary, but these are long-term deals, and who's to say that the same management of those associations is going to be in place in the future. And it's important that we get primary information from the people that are paying the rate, as opposed to the association effectively self-reporting their effectiveness to us. Not to say they're not doing terrific things, but wholeheartedly support it, and well done to Chris and your team to get this done in record time, and the accuracy of it is extraordinarily good, so well done.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak to this report? No. Councillor Bond, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I will jump and go to 8.5, which is 31 Queen's Road, Melbourne. As I mentioned earlier, we have had a forum today in which we've heard from members of the public, both the objectors and the submitters, so we don't have anyone here to speak today to that. So, councillors, do you have any questions of the officers in relation to 31 Queen's Road application? Councillor Bond.
Earlier today we had a discussion on it was revolved around the parking, the loading and the rubbish collection. I think there was a bit of a discussion about strengthening one of the conditions in the report around ensuring that the loading and unloading of residents as they move in and out, and the waste collection and delivery all happens within the site. Has that any changes been made to the conditions to reflect that discussion?
Mr Robinson.
Through you, Madam Chair, we circulated a recommended condition that could be put forward as an alternative recommendation, which would include basically, I think the wording was that all loading and unloading of waste or furniture removalists or delivery trucks would be on site in the designated area that would be shown on the endorsed plans, and also that it should be conducted so that within a manner not to interfere with the circulation and parking of the vehicles on the site also.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Just perhaps one question for me. So there's been significant movement since the initial application was submitted. Just wondered if you could just do a really brief summary of what that's been, because think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Correct. There has been some. The recommendation does suggest a number of changes from what was submitted with council. Originally, the application was approximately 50 metres tall, so 16 levels, excluding the plant and lift overrun. It had 155 dwellings, and also included the building was kind of built 4.5 metres to one side and about 3 metres to the other at points. The major changes that we've made are, one, we've recommended a reduction in the height to 40 metres, excluding the plant, so about 10 metres or 3 levels, and also to pull all the built form within to be set back now 4.5 metres from the side boundary. So what that does is keep that landscape set back along the sides and that important character of Queen's Road, reduce the height to what the DDO suggests is acceptable, and also what we've done is remove the vehicle crossover and driveway at the front through the retention of the 3 large trees in the front of the site. So again, that's to reinforce the character along Queen's Road, which is of substantive landscaping along that section.
Thank you. And the removal of the 3 stories, or to down to 40 metres, there is no preference on which stories to remove?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, we haven't stipulated what particular levels would be removed. We thought that was upon. We weren't really, I guess, fussed, for want of a better word, about what level would be. What levels would be removed, and the applicant, it leaves the applicant a little bit of flexibility in the design to achieve, perhaps, still maintain some of the form that they need to, but also for us to get that reduced height.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Could you just give a quick overview of the dispensation made on car parking and what effects the building is likely to have through the traffic report on the local area's traffic?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the application was for 155 dwellings, and what was proposed was 178 car spaces, all located within the basement, and that included 169 resident spaces and 9 visitor spaces. And that led to a variation of 22 visitor spaces. What we've said is that, and what we've recommended in the report is that the amount of car spaces exceeded that of the planning scheme for resident spaces by 1, and that should be transferred to the visitor space, so going from 9 to 10 visitor spaces within the basement. That's one of the recommendations, and we say that the 21 leftover reduction, if you will, or the 21 space reduction that would be after that, would be acceptable in this location because, well, for the main reasons being it's within 250 metres or so of some major tram lines, a number of them on St Kilda Road, also 3 bus routes along that same road. There's visitor biking provided, there's ample biking spaces provided on the site, there's within 200 metres a commercial off-street car parking building, and also the applicant was able to demonstrate through its survey of the local area that in those times, which are weekends and evenings, there is ample space on the surrounding streets, to cater for that visitor demand for that building particularly. In terms of traffic impact, our officers were assessed the impacts that were provided, or the assessment that was provided, and considered to be satisfactory. And that included a consideration of cumulative impacts from this development and the proposed the approved and being built at, I think it's Charlesfield or 478 St Kilda Road. Yep. And so they considered both of those, provided an assessment as best you could on that development, and again considered what was provided as a satisfactory assessment of that, and that would have minimal impact on the traffic flow and traffic flow within that area, particularly on Queens Lane.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something else? Councillor Bond?
I'd just like to move an alternate recommendation with the adding of one new condition, and that new condition will be numbered number 30, loading and unloading. The loading and unloading of waste and furniture vehicles must only be carried out on the subject land within the designated loading bay as detailed on the endorsed plans, and must be conducted in a manner which does not cause any interference with the circulation and parking of vehicles on the land to the satisfaction of the responsible authority.
It's a little different to what I've got on the screen. Can I have some clarification on that?
All right, that's not it.
The clarification with that condition is that it's a broader definition, so it picks up.
So, Mr. Borg, is it the one on the screen or the one? Councillor Bond, can you please read the one on the screen?
I'll read the one on the screen instead. Loading and unloading, condition 30. The loading and unloading of trucks, including but not limited to waste delivery and removalist vehicles, must only be carried out on the subject land within the designated loading bay as detailed on the endorsed plans, and must be conducted in a manner which does not cause any interference with the circulation and parking of vehicles on the land to the satisfaction of the responsible authority.
Thank you. Now, do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Crawford? No, sorry, I can't see. Who had the... Councillor Baxter. Thank you. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I would. Generally, this is a very good building. This is a 40-metre area, and a 40-metre building height is appropriate in this area. 10 visitor parking spots is a good outcome and better than many of the neighbouring buildings. The apartments here and balcony sizes are all quite good and will provide the residents who move into them with some very good residential amenity when they eventually move in there. I think the condition we've added will ensure that this building will have the lowest possible impact on Queens Lane as any new building is going to have. I think we're all aware of the many problems and issues that we're currently having with traffic on Queens Lane, and it's imperative upon us to ensure that every new building that goes in there has the least possible impact, cumulative impact to the traffic situation on there. And I'd just like to wish whoever the carpenter or glazier happens to be all the best of luck with all those curves, because that's going to be a very challenging job for someone. So,
Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anybody else like to? Councillor Brand.
That's very true, Councillor Bond. Yes, I'm very happy with the proposal under the proposed conditions, or the conditions that we're requiring. I think this council is determined to uphold discretionary controls. The sense of having limits set at a level which are clear and purposeful and absolutely wanted, with the possibility of being able to be changed for good reason where there's a give and take. And I think that I just note that we're determined to defend things like heights and setbacks at the levels which we think they should be. And that's what our conditions do. I certainly hope the building itself is actually obviously a high quality building. The architecture is interesting to me. It has, it's quite a sort of a suave and sort of exuberant sort of architecture with which will demand a lot of high quality craftsmanship to put together. It's so different to the one next door with the Newburn Flats, which are one of my favourite of all buildings, and it's nothing like them. They are absolutely simple. They're they're primitive in their simplicity, and nothing is going to rival your next-door neighbours, I'm afraid, in architectural value to me. But I really do rate what you've done as important and considered, and a big effort has been put into it. And I hope that you will maintain the curvaceousness and the patterns and the language that you've set up, and be able to sort of conform to a slightly tighter set of restrictions in the same idiom with the same quality. And that would be my hope, because I think that even though Councillor Bond is saying that we're trying to minimise the impact of the building in every way, there are positive impacts that a building like this has, and they should be maximised. And I think the beauty factor is there. You're on a site which has a heritage building on either side, which means that you are exposed on either side. It's not just the facade that we're going to see, so we don't want to see a dressed-up facade. The side views of this building are going to make have a prominent place in the streetscape of Queen's Road, so it's appreciated. The trees that we've asked you to keep in the front, I'm thrilled that we can ask you to keep those trees. They are beautiful trees. They've been beautiful trees there for a long, long time. It was quite a nice building that was there originally, and I am really, really thrilled that those trees are going to be kept. And if it puts a bit of a dent in the building, or the building has to sort of live with it in some way, I think that makes it a better building. I think buildings are always better when they have to respond to their context and their environment, rather than just to a cadastral map and a title plan. I think it's really important that buildings are forced to respond to their situation, and they'll come out better, which I think this building may well do, and we're very happy with it generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Pearl.
Just quickly, I support most of the items in the approval that's been suggested. It's a beautiful building in terms of the look and feel of it in the photographs, and I hope it's not one of these buildings that we drive past in 10 years' time and go, my God, that's nothing like what I saw on this night on the council plan. Christ, it's only happened to me once so far, and I'm sure it will happen again, but not on this building, I hope. I think net, it adds a reasonable amount if what is delivered of what we see here to the area, and provides a reasonable amount of setback and addresses some, albeit not all, of the concerns that have been justifiably raised by the community. Yeah, I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Bond, would you like to close? Then I will now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 8.3, which is the Cultural Development Fund grant recommendations. Councillors, we have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Do you have any questions of the officers? We have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Copsey. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford. Thank you. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
Cultural Development Fund Committee recommendations. So, the purpose of this report is to deliver the recommendations of the Cultural Development Fund, which is the committee which considers the applications for funding for arts projects within the City of Port Phillip. I had the pleasure of being the council representative to this committee, and I can say that we've had a very thorough process with some incredibly impressive applications received from a number of fantastic organisations in the community. The recommendations remain confidential until applicants have been informed of the success or otherwise of their application. So I won't speak to any of the individual projects tonight, but just to say that generally we're very impressed by the high standard, and we're very, very excited about the fantastic creative projects that are going to be proceeding in Port Phillip, thanks to the award of these funds. I wanted in particular to note the participation of the community members who sat on the committee, and also thank the officers for their efforts in sorting through a huge amount of material that comes in support of these applications. So it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I look forward to seeing the fruits of this investment in our fantastic creative community. Thank you to committee members Sue Roff, Matthew Boland, Nicola Klempner and Robin Birrell, and also to retired members Malcolm Blaylock and Julie Skate, and in particular to the officers Sue Strano and Sharon Dawson, who have been so instrumental in bringing this to the Council. I commend the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Crawford.
Well, I too, like Councillor Copsey, am very excited to see the end result of the projects. I know there's a lot of hard work ahead for the artists involved or creative persons. So obviously one of my campaign promises was hashtag keep art at the heart, and I note that we are developing a long-term art strategy for the municipality, and so this is a very exciting. I think it's a wonderful thing that we do fund artists doing great work in our community, and I know there's never quite enough money to fund them all, so thank you to the panel that did make the tough decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Anybody else wanting to speak? No, then I'll put that motion. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. We will resume. I'd like to go to 8.6, please. Councillor Baxter. 8.6 is the amendment C132, 26 Stokes Street, the Heritage Overlay, a consideration of the panel report and the adoption of the amendment. Councillors, we have no one that's requested to speak. Do you have any questions of the officers? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak?
I won't speak in detail. We've already discussed this one before as a group of councillors, and it's good to see the process has fully gone through and appears to be reasonably smoothly given the fact that we don't have any speakers here today. So support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Bond? No. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move to item 8.7, which is the Procurement Policy and Financial Delegations update. Again, we have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? No? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover or something or an alternative motion? Councillor Copsey.
I'd like to move an alternative motion.
Could you please read the alternative motion?
Yes,
We'll see if we've got
would you like me to read it in full or just the elements that
the
have
changes should be fine.
Yep. All right. So the changes are in 1.2, where it reads now, adopts the Procurement Policy 2017, Attachment 1, with the following changes to paragraph 5.34. And then it reads, at 5.34, wherever practical, for all procurement processes with a total contract value of $1 million or greater, a representative from the Sustainability and Transport Department will be engaged in the development of tender specifications, and tenderers must complete the Corporate Social Responsibility Schedule, including mandatory disclosure of whether a company has dealings with or funds activities in the following industries: offshore detention, tobacco, fossil fuels energy generation or distribution, gambling, entertainment involving animals including racing. And then at 1.3, requests that the procurement policy be brought back to Council for review within the next 6 months.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sinnick. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to your motion?
I will, thank you. So the amendment, the alternative motion tonight is to clarify some language that was presented in the report that was circulated in our pack. Councillors have to, I understand that the reason that this report is coming before us tonight is that councillors must complete an annual review on before the 30th of June of the procurement policy. Several councillors have expressed a desire to... We have a current social and environmental responsibility focus in our procurement and investment policies in the City of Port Phillip, and several councillors have expressed an interest in strengthening our controls in this regard. We've had a very busy 6 months, first 7 months in office, and we haven't yet had a chance to have a thorough briefing and discuss this as a group of councillors. However, I'm also... that explains the reason that we're seeking to bring this motion back for review within such a short period of time, within the next 6 months. The intention of the changed wording in 5.34 is to essentially provide councillors with greater information. We already have a requirement for a corporate social responsibility schedule in our existing procurement policy. That element hasn't changed. What this will do is require disclosure of if a company participating in a procurement process has dealings in any of those industries, which are some that are commonly considered to have a social or ethical impact. It doesn't bind council to do anything with this information. It just means that those dealings will be revealed as part of the corporate and social responsibility schedule that the company submits. So that's the intention of this, and I commend this alternate recommendation to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Is it a clarifying question, Councillor Brand? Yes, you can ask that before we go to Councillor Simic.
I'm just wondering, in the proposed paragraph 5.3.4, that a representative from the Sustainability and Transport Department be engaged in the development of tender specifications. Why? I don't understand the intent of that, considering of the five areas of concern. Only one of them is an environmental one, and I'm not sure that somebody from transport and sustainability is necessarily going to be the best arbiter.
Can you ask your question, please?
Why is it from that particular department, and if it's about ethical investment across a whole range of different things, only one of which is a environmental one?
Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor. One of the things we were trying to strengthen in this policy in particular is around how we support our environmental objectives. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We couldn't build something into the policy that would apply to everything. We have to be able to develop something that's specific to a particular tender. It also requires a little bit of expertise in the area of environmental sustainability, about how we might be clever with designing our tender specifications to further that objective without necessarily undermining other objectives. So that specific part of the motion, or of the original recommendation, was around having that level of expertise when it gets to those certain size of tenders. They wouldn't necessarily provide an expertise or being asked to provide comment on all the other ethical and social requirements. If needed, we would involve those other departments as required. But the requirement for a corporate social responsibility statement was a related but broader requirement to achieve those broader environmental, social and economic outcomes. The requirement for the sustainability team to be involved is really to make sure in that particular area of environmental sustainability we've got the right capability on the tender, involved in designing the tender.
Thank you. Does that clarify why that...
It clarifies it, but it doesn't make me
comfortable.
Feel like we've actually got the right answer here.
Councillor Bond, do you have another question?
Very along the lines of David's. Councillor Brands, wouldn't it be the role of the CEO of the organisation to decide who should be the best people to prepare the tender specifications, not us to decide who should be doing that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, I would sign off on tender processes. If you wanted to broaden this, there could be, a suitable representative or a suitable expertise brought in. That would be one way to broaden it. If it doesn't, so that we could bring suitable expertise into the development of tender specifications.
I also have... Mr Carroll, do you want to add to that, or I can see you sort of thinking?
Yeah. Through you, Madam Mayor, what this policy does is actually ensure that in your delegation to the CEO that there's some specific things that you want accounted for as we implement our procurement processes. So yes, there is a delegation to the CEO, but in adopting this policy, the CEO and the organisation must operate within these requirements that you're adopting. In the policy itself, it does enable us to bring in the right expertise for the right tender at the right time. This was a specific clause targeted towards environmental sustainability at the time we drafted it. We could broaden it to say we'll bring in appropriate expertise to develop the tender specifications related to broader corporate social responsibility. But within that as well, some of the tenders the CEO delegates to officers as well within our delegations. So not all tenders will initially be governed by the CEO, depending on the dollar threshold. But these ones, the $1 million and above, would be.
Councillor Pearl, also a clarifying question.
What would be the cost impact on the budget of this? So do we have to hire somebody in the Sustainability and Transport Department to facilitate this alternative motion? And would it potentially, I think it's unlikely, but would it also increase the cost base of the council through reduction number of tenders, etc.? So what's the budget impact of this amendment?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think Mr Moore might correct me if I've got this a bit wrong, but I think there'd probably be about 15 to 20 tenders a year that might be over the $1 million threshold. Is that?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that would be about right. So it's not a significant portion of our tenders. Obviously, the higher level ones we want to focus our resources on and ensure they're resourced correctly.
So there's not a high volume, but in my initial discussions with the Sustainability Department, they believe that this is something they could accommodate, and it's the reason that we have got a threshold that we wouldn't do it for every tender. It's for the major tenders. And while there might only be 15 to 19 of those major tenders a year, they'd take up probably 60 to 70% of the value of the tenders that we do.
Pearl,
to follow up, if I can keep going. So this, under the current policy, this would relate to the entity that's tendering as opposed to the conglomerate. So hypothetically, if there was an insurance renewal up and one of those companies was, say, Berkshire Hathaway, who operates 1,000 companies probably in terms of its network, which one of those companies would be required to comply with this amendment under the policy?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in accordance with our normal tendering protocols, the tendering body, whoever the key entity who is tendering, submitting the tender, would respond to the schedule. So there's a schedule incorporated in our standard tender documentation whereby the tenderer would be completing that in accordance with their tender document.
So just to be clear, if Gutter Cleaning Services Proprietary Limited was owned by the same person as Tobacco Production Proprietary Limited, they wouldn't have to disclose the fact that a related entity or somebody, sorry, not a related entity, but a sister company, for example, same shareholder, was involved in the manufacturing of tobacco products. Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would need to look into that. I'd have to go back and check, but generally it's for the company that is providing the tender.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I can add to that. My reading of this recommendation, a mandatory disclosure of whether a company has dealings with or funds activities in the following activities, it could be a broader interpretation, so it could be shareholding. Councillor Pearl.
So that would increase, the investigation of that would increase, it would be a fair bit of work for council to investigate that thoroughly.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, going to try and look through more to all the related parties and testing the validity of some of the responses would create additional work for us.
Councillor Bond, clarifying question as well.
Yeah, is the cost of this additional work that would come out of adopting this policy, combined with the loss of value that we're going to achieve for each of these 15 to 19 contracts, likely to be more than $10,000 per contract, i.e. in total $150,000 to $190,000 across the 15 to 19 contracts?
Mr Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's hard to say from looking at it at this holistic level. I think when we look at procurement, we look at the specifications, value is determined by a range of things. Price is one aspect, but it's not the only aspect, and so we always look at value in a broader sense, and it'll be things like price, it'll be things like capability to meet the specifications and the requirements of the tender, and we already have a range of requirements around looking at broader environmental, social and economic value, and we look at those things holistically to determine what the best value is for that particular procurement. The weightings will change, and the specific criteria and the weightings will change depending on the nature of the procurement. So all this is trying to do, it doesn't dictate a specific weighting. That has to be done on a tender by tender basis. We want to have expertise in there to help us to make sure that we do that to achieve the best value without compromising other things like price. But there is always a trade-off between broader value and price in these kind of things. Sometimes we get both. Sometimes we have a great environmental outcome and a lower price, particularly when you consider the ongoing costs of things like street lighting. If we use lower, might cost us a little bit more up front, but the whole of life cost might be lower and the environmental impact's better as well. Thank you.
Councillor Bond, another clarifying question.
Yeah, just given we don't have all the facts and the impact on our budget's likely to be $150,000 or who knows what the impact of our budget's likely to be, shouldn't we delay this till we have all the facts in front of us?
Is that an actual question, Councillor Bond? Thank you, Mr Carroll. I don't think you're excused from answering that question. Councillor Simic, you are the seconder. Would you like to speak to the motion now that we've clarified everything?
I was, and I would. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to add to Councillor Copsey's very eloquently presented opening statements, this is a measure that the community has been talking to many councillors about. We know that recently a Stop Adani Melbourne Ports group formed, who was looking and has been looking at the social and environmental impacts of investment. As a council entity, we have quite large tenders that we are part of, that we should be reviewing against social and environmental standards. This goes some way towards helping us identify more clearly what some of the activities of the organisations that we might work with are. But the bit that I'm particularly looking forward is the review and proper review of the procurement policy, as we'll have an opportunity to do within the next 6 months. There's obviously other measures that other councils have taken. There's many councils that have worked towards a fully articulated divestment policy. There's other councils who've specifically opted not to work with organisations that have any involvement in offshore detention. All of these are important aspects to consider when our budget's as big as it is and our engagement in the community is as big as it is, and the investment really carries with it significant responsibility. So I just want to add my support to the alternate recommendation. Look forward to a proper review within the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this motion. I'd like to flag an alternate recommendation, which will be the original recommendation from officers, minus all this stuff, in the event that this current motion before us fails. Purpose of the procurement policy is to deliver best value and best outcome to the residents and ratepayers of Port Phillip. If we adopt this, our procurement policy is going to look like a Greens Party flyer, and we all know that best value and best outcomes and the Greens Party are polar opposites. So this will be nothing but detrimental to the residents and ratepayers of the City of Port Phillip, and therefore I won't be supporting this policy with those inclusions.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Baxter.
I'd like to speak in favour of the of this motion. I think that this actually just strengthens our existing procurement process. As Mr. Carroll said, this is about getting the best value. It's not always about exactly the dollars or exactly the job that we need them to do. It's a weighted examination of all of these different things, and this is something that we already have social and ethical values programmed into our procurement policy. So regardless of deliberate misinformation that's been put out there, that has put one councillor has attempted to put a dollar value budget cost on this item, which is complete fabrication, which comes from no data whatsoever. I think that we should absolutely be proceeding with this sort of approach in our procurement and hopefully in all of our business dealings, so that we're making sure that ratepayers' money is not going to unethical dealings.
Councillor Brand. Thank you.
I would like to support the alternative recommendation. I would be much more able to support it if there was a slight change of wording that added and or other expert officers or to review as relevant. I don't think getting somebody from the Transport and Sustainability department to rule, to sort of be an expert on steeplechasing or tobacco advertising or whatever is going to do the trick just because they might have some sort of ideological setting on it. I think that we need to actually have these, if they are in any way relevant in the declaration of companies. We need to have people who know something about whether they can assess the ethical concerns. I do think it's important to be ethical investors and ethical procurers. I just think that's part and parcel of any responsible government or company, for that matter. I think it will affect slightly best value in financial terms, and it absolutely must. But I don't think that it has to. It depends on exactly how it's rolled out. I think this is a list of areas of obvious concern. I don't think that the way that the motion is worded, it says that we cannot procure anything from somebody who might have an investment in a gambling concern or something like that. I think it just needs to be considered, and if the impact is severe, I think that it needs to be then reconsidered. But I think that we should note that on all of those 5 areas of concern, not all of council is going to be concerned about them in the same way, and I don't think this is actually predetermining what our position would be on it. It just needs to be looked at it and reported on, and thought about and considered, and then have some influence. So I'm in favour of it, but I'm wondering if it's possible to.
Are you asking the mover to add and/or other expert officers.
That's my suggestion. Yes.
Should I respond now or in closing?
You can respond now, and then we can ask the seconder if he agrees, and then we can add that. It's not substantial, so we can do it on the floor.
So just to respond, and I guess it's a bit of a clarifying comment, because I want to make clear that the inclusion of the representative from the Sustainability and Transport Department was not part of my proposed changes to the officers' recommendation this evening. So actually I think officers might be better placed to respond to any impact that change might have.
Through you, Madam Mayor. If the procurement and contracts team supports all tenders over $150,000, that's Mr. Moore's team. That team has got some guidance as well as, in many cases, training in social and ethical procurement. That's already there. Where we have a bit of a gap is the complexity that's associated with the designing the tender specs and around environmental issues, and that's why that's specifically there, to give comfort that we will have that co-opted. But we already have some expertise that will be involved naturally from the procurement and contracts team.
So just to be clear, Mr. Carroll, you object to including and/or other expert officers in that recommendation?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't think we're objecting to it. I think we're saying it's redundant because we have expertise in the existing procurement team.
Yeah.
But if it was included for greater clarity, we wouldn't object to it. Is that what you're saying, no. Mr. Carroll?
Through you, Madam Mayor,
correct me if I'm wrong.
Wouldn't object to it. We do have that. It's inherent that we have that expertise involved. What we were trying to do here was to make really clear that where the expertise may not exist, that we would ensure we've got that, and that's why we specifically stated Sustainability and Transport Department.
A clarifying question.
Green. Oh, I see. Sorry, would it be possible to put "and" as where relevant, a representative from the Sustainable and Transport? It's just that if we're doing it with Tabcorp or something like that, then
Councillor Brand.
Sorry.
Is it a no?
Through you, Madam Mayor, our recommendation as officers is that for all tenders over $1 million, that we must have a sustainability and transport person involved in those developing the tender specifications.
That's clear. Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
I wholeheartedly support the officer's recommendation that was read through before. Councillor Copsey, fully appreciate and understand what you're doing here. I suspect, though, the more prescriptive we get versus the cost versus the value, I'm not sure we'll get the outcome which we would all like. For example, alcohol's not there, which is one of my pet hates. I think the officer's recommendation, I don't know why you wouldn't have alcohol. If you want to be as prescriptive as tobacco and gambling, we're dealing with much greater problems on our doorstep, literally our doorstep out the front of here. The secondary and primary effects of alcohol-fueled violence. Why we want more about that? The existing corporate social responsibility schedule and the procedures that have been recommended in the original recommendation provided by the fantastic officers tonight, I think, have the right balance between giving you the information you need to make a really good, educated decision to ensure that we're giving business to ethical contractors, and to ensure that we're following practical procedures within the organisation. So I support the original officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Anybody else wishing to talk on this motion? No? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
Thanks. I'll just address some of the points that have been raised. I think it's a fair point regarding the clarity of the sentence that reads whether a company has dealings with or funds activities. I'm wondering if I could just clarify with the officers, I suppose, if it would be more consistent with the existing language in the policy to use the word tendering entity instead of company in that sentence. So that it would read mandatory disclosure of whether a tendering entity has dealings with.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be that would make it clearer.
So I'll request that that change be. I hope that doesn't. I hope that responds to points that have been raised.
Councillor Simic, are you okay with that? Yep. Okay. Councillor Copsey, if you could continue with your close.
Thank you. So I hear the points that have been raised. I consider that this doesn't add massively to the requirements that whether we're asking tendering entities to comply with already. The burden of disclosure is on the tendering entities, so it doesn't create an additional requirement for us in assessing the tender to go out. We have to already interrogate the validity of responses to tenders, and I think that this disclosure requirement is just clearer to tendering entities regarding the information that the City of Port Phillip is interested in knowing when they're completing the corporate social responsibility schedule. I take on board the points that have been raised about the list of items. I've tried to reflect what I understand are common elements of social and ethical responsibility charters in terms of the industries that are reflected there, and I am cognisant that we will have a more in-depth discussion about this as councillors, which is why I've also requested the review. I'll note that I'll just repeat the observation that this doesn't require council to come to any particular decision regarding a tendering entity's suitability. It just requires them to provide additional information which should be useful to councillors or to the assessment panel in reviewing responses to tender. So I don't think that this is an onerous requirement, and I certainly don't think that it's going to compromise our ability to deliver best value to our community. We already require this sort of disclosure. It's just being clearer about the kind of information that we wish to see come before us. And as the officers have remarked, social and ethical responsibility criteria are just one factor, and pricing and other factors remain relevant considerations for our tendering panels, and will be a key consideration going forward. So, to sum up, this simply requires more and better information for the City of Port Phillip to assess and deal with when we are requesting responses from tendering entities, and it's not a frolic. It's an issue that people in our community are currently concerned about. It's come in response, my motion tonight has come in response to contact from community members who are concerned about the efficacy of our current procurement policies, social and ethical credentials. I recognise we've got a longer conversation to have, but I think that this is a good way for us to get more information in the interim, and I'd be surprised if any councillor would deny themselves access to better information when assessing these sorts of issues. I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Well, now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Councillor Copsey and Councillor Bond have requested a division, and I can't quite determine who got it first. So don't know if we can write them both down, but so I'll ask for that again. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Brand, Councillor Copsey. All those against? Councillor Pearl, Councillor Bond. That motion is carried. Thank you. I will now move to item 8.8. Councillor Pearl.
Madam Mayor, I, Councillor Marcus Pearl, declare that in relation to item 8.8, annual insurance renewals 2017-2018, I have a conflict of interest in this matter by way of a indirect financial interest.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. We'll call you when we're finished. Again, councillors, we haven't got anyone that's requested to speak from the public. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? So we're talking about 8.8 is annual insurance renewals, 2017-2018. There are none. We have an officer's recommendation. Sorry, do you have any questions? Do I have a mover? Councillor Baxter, seconder. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak? I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Bond, Councillor Pearl, I think you heard that. No? Back. Right. 8.9, the Palais Theatre. So, Community Fund Committee and Community Advisory Committee, the terms of reference. We have no members of the public requesting to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Copsey. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
Yes, just to note that these are essential bodies for us realising the community benefits, and I'm looking forward to the expressions of interest for people to join these bodies to be advertised widely. I hope that in addition to the requirement under the report we've seen, the terms that we've seen of the advertisements being placed in a local paper, that we'll also be doing our best to spread the word online and through council's various channels. They're really important bodies that we want to get genuine community participation in and representative community participation. So I look forward to seeing these realise some of the benefits of the arrangement we have going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Well done to the previous council for incorporating these initiatives into a very large contract. So it's pretty exciting to see what actually falls out of these, and over time, hopefully, this is another way that our local community can benefit from a very large lease contract that was undertaken by the previous council. So it's very exciting, and I'll be super excited to see what gets happens over the future years from these initiatives.
Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Well done. Now we'll move to 8.10, the Road Management Plan Review. I don't have anyone that's requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I have a quick question. I'd like to know when this is coming up, how long this plan's for. I just can't quite remember.
Madam Mayor, it's a 4-year plan, and it will be aligned with the next council plan development. We'll undertake another review.
Councillor Copsey.
I'd just like to know how, so I think it's touched on in the report, but if officers could just clarify for me how these plans will fit in, given the task that council has set itself in producing our integrated transport strategy, how these plans might fit with the decisions that the council reaches under that strategy.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have the ability to update this plan as required, and so if there was any major changes to the way that we needed to operate our road network, we would be able to do that.
I'd like to ask a question too. I was under the understanding that we were changing our level of service, or how often we were renewing our road infrastructure. Is this under this plan? Because it says here that we won't be making any changes to the current standard of constructions.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and Mr Thompson might be able to help me respond to this if I've got it wrong, but my understanding is that we're not actually changing the surface level, we're changing the way that we maintain and renew the roads to be more efficient. So the service level will be maintained, but rather than replacing sections of the road that aren't required to be replaced, that haven't reached the end of their useful life, so it's the way that we've been going about our renewals program, which has been driving additional expenditure that's not required to maintain the level of service. The team are working through, we've just done our first generation asset management plans in alignment with the council plan and budget process, and over the next 12 months we'll be spending more time reviewing those and, if need be, having conversations with you and the community around service levels. Initial information from the broad level view that we've had a look at is that even with the reduced investment that we've made in roads and footpaths this year, it still may be an overinvestment, and that we may need to be investing more in buildings over time. But we need to do a little bit more data analysis on that and bring it back to you. Again, at this stage, though, I don't expect it's going to have an impact on our service levels, because it's more about how we're going about our renewals than the service level and the standard itself.
So, Mr Carroll, can I ask you, is it correct then, what it says in 3.6, that we are not changing our maintenance or repair when we actually are?
Through you, Madam Mayor. It's correct. The current service levels which were in the previous plan still remain the same, although the way we're doing them service levels will be reviewed over the next 12 months.
So through you, Madam Mayor, I think what we're saying is we're still maintaining and repairing the road to the standard in the road management plan, but how we go about that and the types of the extent that we go to is different.
Okay, so that's that, and that'll be detailed in the asset management plan.
That's right.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Copsey. Councillor Bond, second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Councillor Bond. Would anybody else? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Move to 8.11, the asset management policy. Again, we have no questions from the office, from the public. Councillors, any questions? We have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Crawford, thank you. Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Anybody else? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so now we're moving on to item number 9, notices of motion. We have none. Item number 10, reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, are there any reports? Councillor Baxter.
I'll make it quick because it's getting late, but I just want to note that as a delegate to the Friends of Sawai group, the Friends of Sawai will be sending an election monitoring delegation to the East Timor parliamentary elections early next month, and they'll be performing a really important duty in terms of monitoring their democratic progress, and it's a really exciting time for East Timor and for the town of Sawai and the district of Covalima, of which we have a it's not a sister city agreement. It's yes. Well, it's a special friendship or a sister city agreement or whatever you like. And they at the last meeting they did talk about some amazing things that they're doing in terms of hygiene training in the local school there, and as well as just the general sort of things of making sure that the libraries are having more books and more sort of resources like that, and training the staff for the community centre in terms of bookkeeping and things like this. It's all really amazing stuff. So just want to report that back.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Anybody else? Councillor Crawford.
I thought it rather amiss as the council representative on the Gasworks board that I better do a report for this time. So I just wanted to note that it's very exciting that we're, with the council along with Gasworks, about to reopen the upgraded theatres and gallery space. I think our little openings on the July the 11th. And so there's going to be some fantastic shows and a much more flexible and exciting space to be used in the future. I also note that Regenesis, which was the outdoor sculpture in Ackland Street, has been relocated to Gasworks Park, which I think is a fantastic home for it in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Anybody else wishing to? Delegates report? Okay, then we'll move on to urgent business. There is none. Then we'll move into confidential. Councillors, we have one item which is confidential regarding 200 to 204 Wells Street, South Melbourne. I'll now call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to the members of the public. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Bond has moved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl to second that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with Section 89(2)(f) of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider a confidential item relating to legal advice. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll wait till the doors closed, galleries cleared. Thank you very much.